I just got pulled back to reality by a sharp, angry voice. That's when I realized the truth. I had traveled back in time to 1973, and I was now living in the body of a girl who had been swapped at birth. This girl spent years working as basically a servant for her adoptive family. Just when things were finally looking up, she turned 18 and had a fiancé. A girl named Song Jinjin showed up claiming to be the family's real daughter. You could tell just by looking at their faces. No proof needed. Apparently, I'm actually the daughter of 2 university professors, but my real parents had been labeled as political criminals. Song Jinjin's timing was suspicious. She showed up the day before my adoptive family got into serious trouble and somehow avoided all the consequences herself. Before I could think too hard about this, my future mother-in-law Zhao Lanhua announced that the engagement was off. She threw an old watch on the table and demanded back the gold bracelet the Ding family had given as an engagement gift. I stayed calm. I asked whether the breakup was her idea or my fiancé Ding Jianya's. She showed me his telegram. It simply said, "Break off the engagement immediately." I kept the telegram as proof and agreed to end things without any fuss. She seemed surprised I didn't cry. Once she left, Song Jinjin tried to take the old watch, claiming it belonged to the family. But that watch was mine, a gift I had personally received from an old man I once helped. I put it on my wrist and refused to give it up. I also called out Song Jinjin for wearing clothes, jewelry, and shoes that my real parents had bought. She denied taking anything, but her nervous body language told me everything. I suspected she had even taken the money my real parents set aside for me, and abandoned my little brother on top of that. I decided I would find a way to get back what was mine. Then Song Jinjin dropped her polite act entirely and lunged at me, trying to rip the watch right off my wrist. I was ready for Song Jinjin when she lunged at me. I grabbed her hand and slapped her across the face several times. Then I pushed her away and warned her. She had pushed me into a table corner yesterday, and I still had a bump on my head. I told her I could report her to the police for trying to steal what my birth mother left me. That scared her. She called me a liar and ran off to hide behind Li Shulan. I waited in the living room, but neither of them came back out. She was clearly too afraid to make a big deal of it. So I went back to my room, a tiny storage closet with no windows and no light. In the dark, I bumped into a shelf and got a nosebleed. As I pressed a cloth to my nose, a strange mechanical voice came from the watch on my wrist. Valid DNA detected. System 1527 activated. The old watch was glowing bright blue. I quickly shut the door. I was thrilled. This had to be the special power that comes with traveling through time. The watch explained itself through glowing text. It was a collection system from an advanced planet. That planet had destroyed its own environment, and now they needed to collect plant and animal samples from other worlds to rebuild their ecosystem. System 1527 had been sent to Earth, but lacked energy here, so it hid inside this mechanical watch and waited for a human partner. In return for helping collect samples, I could earn star coins and spend them in a shop full of amazing items, things like nutrition supplements and other useful goods. I was eager to try it out. I asked if anyone else could see the glowing watch, and the system told me only I could see it. So I went straight to the kitchen and scanned some vegetables with the watch. But the system rejected them. The greens had no roots, so they counted as lifeless and couldn't be collected. I searched the whole house but found nothing that qualified. I grabbed the few yuan I had secretly saved up over the years and headed out. After I left, Song Jinjin watched me from the window, burning with jealousy. She hated that even in plain clothes I looked beautiful just like my birth mother. She had always been bitter about how different she looked compared to my mother and how people noticed. Then she turned to Li Shulan and said she wanted to marry Ding Jianya, my ex-fiancé. It turns out Song Jinjin had lived a past life. In that life, she had been sent to the countryside along with my real parents and they all died. She ended up marrying a terrible man in a poor village and lived a miserable life. Then one day, at over 40 years old, she finally met her birth parents and saw me there too, looking young and beautiful, married to Ding Jianya, who had become a successful official. The shock of seeing how different our lives turned out literally killed her on the spot. When she opened her eyes again, She had been reborn back to this moment in time. Now she was determined to take everything that was supposed to be mine, starting with Ding Jianya. She sweet-talked Li Shulan, saying she needed to marry to avoid being sent to the countryside, and that Ding Jianya was the most promising man around. She even added that the marriage would benefit Li Shulan's youngest son in the future. She knew exactly which buttons to press. While Song Jinjin and Li Shulan were scheming inside, plotting to marry Song Jinjin off to my ex-fiancé Ding Jianya, I was outside trying out my new system. I found some wild grass by the road and scanned it with the watch. It worked. I earned 5-star coins. I got excited and tried scanning more of the same grass, but the system told me I couldn't collect the same type of plant twice. So I searched around and only found 2 more different kinds, earning just 15 coins total. I decided to try the supply store, hoping to find some live animals or fresh plants with roots. No luck there either. But something good did happen. I ran into my old high school friend, Yang Lifan. She was happy to see me and told me her mother had been promoted to director at the local street office nearby. When I told her about my situation, she was furious at how I'd been treated, especially by Ding Jianya. I asked her for one favor: help me find out about my real parents. Her father worked at the city government, and her mother ran the street office, so getting information like this would be easy for her family. She went inside her mother's office, while I waited. Half an hour later, she came back looking upset. She told me my birth parents had been sent to a small village far away in the north, and she gave me their address. Then she asked if I knew I had a younger brother. I was shocked. Song Jinjin had never mentioned a brother. Yang Lifan explained that when Song Jinjin left my parents' home, she took my 8-year-old brother with her. But when she arrived at the textile factory, he was gone. She had abandoned him somewhere along the way. When I heard his name, Song Zi, 8 years old, my heart nearly stopped. In my previous life, I also had a brother named Song Zi who died at 8 in a terrible accident. My parents in my previous life had the exact same names too, my mother by Qing Xia and my father Song Hao, both university professors. In my old life, they were driving to see me on my 15th birthday when a road collapsed and buried their car. I lost all 3 of them that day. Even after all these years, the memory still haunts me. This couldn't just be a coincidence. I held back my tears, thanked Yang Lifan from the bottom of my heart, and hurried home. I needed to find out what happened to my little brother. The thought of an 8-year-old child, abandoned and alone in a world where you can't even travel without official papers, terrified me. When I got back to the apartment building, my adoptive father Song Weigwa caught up to me. He didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, he warned me not to wander around, saying my situation could bring trouble to his family. I went straight home and kicked open Song Jinjin's door. I grabbed her and demanded to know where my little brother Song Zi was. She pretended not to understand, then claimed he was with my birth parents. I didn't believe her, so I slapped her until she started to panic. Song Weigwa and Li Shulan rushed in to protect her. Li Shulan came at me with a cooking spatula, but I shoved Song Jinjin into her, and they crashed into each other. I didn't care about either of them. I only wanted answers about my brother. Song Jinjin kept insisting she knew nothing. So I headed for the door and announced I was going to report her to the police. I called her a child trafficker right in front of Song Weigwa and warned him that his precious daughter could face serious punishment, maybe even execution. That terrified her. Her face went white, and she kept shaking her head. I wasn't actually planning to leave yet. I didn't have enough information to tell the police anything useful. I just needed to scare the truth out of her. So when Song Weigwa stopped me at the door, I let him. I warned him not to touch me. I wasn't his daughter anymore, and I'd report him too if he laid a hand on me. He was shocked. The old Song Yun had been quiet and obedient. This version of me was nothing like that. Li Shulan came at me again with the spatula, screaming that I was making things up. I grabbed her wrist and twisted it hard. She screamed so loud the whole building could hear. I told them I didn't mind if every neighbor found out they were harboring a child trafficker. That finally got Song Weigwa's attention. He could hear nosy neighbors coming closer, so he covered Li Shulan's mouth and told me to keep quiet while they figured things out. I gave him 5 minutes. After that, I said, we'd settle it at the police station. Song Weiguo went into the room and confronted Song Jinjin directly. He warned her not to lie. If she hadn't covered her tracks well enough, she shouldn't count on getting away with it. That made Song Jinjin think back carefully to the day she left my parents' home with my brother. She realized she hadn't been careful at all. Several people had seen her leaving with him, and my brother had even greeted some teachers and told them where they were going. She was starting to realize she couldn't hide this forever. Song Jinjin finally confessed under pressure from Song Weiguo. She admitted she had given my brother away to a family out in the countryside. She claimed she even paid them 10 yuan to take him because they didn't want an 8-year-old. She insisted she didn't receive any money, so it wasn't really trafficking, just foster care. I wasn't buying it. I told them I'd decide for myself once I found my brother and saw his condition. Song Weiguo made Song Jinjin give me the address. Then I asked for a travel letter. You can't go anywhere in this era without one, and he agreed to get me one, mostly because he wanted to clear his daughter's name. Next, I went after the money. I knew my brother had been there when my real parents divided up their savings, so he could confirm everything. Song Jinjin's face gave her away immediately. She had kept all 3 shares for herself, mine, my brother's, and her own. Then Song Weiguo surprised me. He demanded that I officially cut ties with their family. He was terrified that my connection to my politically criminal birth parents would bring trouble to his household. Honestly, this was exactly what I wanted, but I didn't let it show. I told him I'd agree. But first, Song Jinjin had to return every last coin. If even 1 cent was missing, I'd report them all. Song Jinjin screamed that she'd never go back to a labor camp. Li Shulan cursed me out, calling me ungrateful after they raised me well for 18 years. That made me angry. I reminded her exactly what my life had been like, eating their leftover scraps, washing the whole family's laundry in freezing water since I was 5, waking up at 4 in the morning to cook all their meals, nearly being pulled out of school to babysit their son. I only got to keep studying because a kind neighbor reported the situation and because my grades were too good to ignore. My hands were covered in rough calluses, while Song Jinjin's were soft and smooth. Even a hired servant would have been treated better than me. Li Shulan had nothing real to say back. She just kept yelling about how ungrateful I was. I cut the argument short. I told them to hand over the money, or I'd send a report to the Revolutionary Committee. Song Weiguo was furious. I could see he wanted to hit me, but nosy neighbors were listening through the walls, including the building's busybody director. He didn't dare. He turned to Song Jinjin and growled, "Give it to her." Song Jinjin finally gave in. She went to her room and pulled out a suitcase with a hidden compartment. Inside were 2,400 yuan and a stack of ration tickets for grain, cloth, sugar, cotton, and more. This was 2 out of 3 shares my birth parents had prepared. She kept her own share hidden, knowing no one could prove it wasn't hers. When Song Weiguo and Li Shulan saw all that money, their eyes went red with greed. They had no idea Song Jinjin had brought so much from my parents' home. I took the money, counted everything carefully, and wrote it all down on the document cutting ties with the family. I wasn't going to give them any chance to come after me later. Song Weiguo went and got me a travel letter. Then we all signed the document, 3 copies, 1 for each side and 1 for the street office records. I also moved my household registration out of their home. Luckily, Yang Lifan's mother was at the street office and helped me get it done quickly. Song Weiguo watched me leave with the money, but didn't try anything. He knew the money was connected to my politically criminal parents, so touching it could destroy him. He also figured Song Jinjin had kept some money hidden for herself, and as her father, he'd get his hands on it eventually. I rushed to the bus station. It was already past 1 in the afternoon, and I had no time to waste. I caught a bus to the outskirts of the city, then hired a donkey cart to take me to a place called Xiaba Village. Song Jinjin had overheard someone mention a family there with 5 daughters who desperately wanted a son. That's where she dumped my brother. I arrived around 4:30. I paid the donkey cart driver to wait for me and went into the village. I quickly found the house, the Wang family. Through the low fence, I could see a small boy crouched in the corner of the yard, washing a huge pile of dirty laundry. A fat woman and two girls sat nearby cracking sunflower seeds, yelling at him constantly, saying he was too slow, not washing well enough, even throwing stones and dirt at him. My heart was pounding. I pushed open the gate and walked straight to the boy. "Z," I called out, my voice shaking. He looked up. Tears were running down his face. He had never seen me before, but I could tell he noticed the resemblance to our mother. And for me, it was like seeing a ghost. He looked exactly like my brother from my previous life. I could barely speak. But before I could say anything, the fat woman shoved my shoulder and demanded to know who I was. I pulled myself together, pointed at the rope tied to my brother, and said coldly, "This is my brother. I've been looking for him. You have a lot of nerve. Do you know what the punishment is for child trafficking?" The fat woman, Qian Suehua, cursed at me and grabbed a stick, threatening to beat me. But when I saw the bruises on Z's face and the overlapping wounds on his arms, I lost it. I grabbed a washing paddle from the basin and hit her over and over. She couldn't fight back. Once I'd let out some of my anger, I lied to scare her. I told her Song Jinjin had already been arrested by the police, and that officers would arrive in 30 minutes. I said I came ahead of them to take my brother, and if she let him go, she and Song Jinjin could both avoid being charged with child trafficking. She was terrified. She'd been a bully her whole life, but she wasn't brave enough to mess with the police. She quickly untied the rope from Z's ankle and tried to act like everything was fine, dusting him off, pretending she'd been taking good care of him. I pushed her aside and took my brother's hand. I asked him quietly if he had anything to collect. He told me the woman had already sold most of his clothes to other families in the village for 26 yuan. He remembered every detail. I demanded the money back, plus his remaining belongings and his suitcase. She tried to argue that he owed her for food and board. I just mentioned the police again, and she caved immediately. Within 5 minutes, she brought out a small wooden case with a few of Z's things, and most importantly, his household registration papers. I could use those to put him on my own record later. She also handed over the 26 yuan, furious with herself for not hiding the money better. I grabbed everything, took Z's hand, and walked out. Nobody in the village tried to stop us. The donkey cart driver was still waiting at the village entrance. We climbed on and didn't look back. Only when the village disappeared completely behind us did I finally relax. I let go of Z's hand and noticed I'd been gripping so hard I'd left marks on his wrist. Then I saw the long, overlapping wounds on his arms, marks from being beaten with something. My tears wouldn't stop. I held his small hands and kept saying, "I'm sorry. Your sister came too late." Z trusted me right away. Maybe it was a blood connection between us. When he saw me crying, he cried too, but kept saying he was fine. I held him tight and let out years of grief for my past life. Eventually, we both calmed down and even laughed at each other's tear-stained faces. I asked him if Song Jinjin had sold him. He shook his head sadly. She actually paid the family 10 yuan to take him because they didn't want him at first. That meant I couldn't charge her with trafficking. Legally, it was just foster care. Frustrating, but nothing I could do about it. On the ride back to the city, I suddenly noticed all the green plants around us and remembered my collection system. I asked the driver to stop, sneaked behind a hill, and quickly scanned as many different plants as I could. Mostly common weeds, but with so many different types, I earned 145 star coins total. Back in the city, I took Z to a health clinic where they put purple antiseptic on his wounds. That was all they had. Then we checked into a guest house with my travel letter and got a simple room with 2 small beds. We were both starving. It was too late for the state-run restaurant, so I used 50 star coins to buy a basic nutrition liquid from the system shop. I mixed a third of it into warm water and gave it to Z. He thought it was sugar water. Within moments, his hunger disappeared, his strength came back, and even his pain eased. He wanted me to drink the rest, noticing my cracked lips and growling stomach. I finished the remaining water and was amazed. Just a small amount completely removed my hunger and exhaustion. Z asked about our parents. I told him I knew where they were and promised to take him to them soon. But I warned him that when we got there, he'd have to pretend not to know them in front of others. If anyone discovered our connection, it would mean serious trouble for everyone. He agreed without hesitation. He was only 8, but he understood the danger. After lights out, I quietly opened the system shop and browsed properly for the first time. It had everything organized into categories: food, medicine, tools, shelter. Mid-level nutrition liquid cost 500 coins and could fix genetic problems. High-level was 5,000 coins and could basically bring someone back from the edge of death. The medicine section had healing sprays, painkillers, fever reducers, and bone-mending bandages. The tools section had knives, electric batons, and even energy guns, all far beyond anything on Earth. With only 80 coins left, I could barely afford anything. I sighed and was about to close the shop when I noticed one last category at the bottom: storage. Before falling asleep, I checked the storage section in the system shop. Storage units cost 500 star coins per cubic meter. With only 80 coins, I couldn't afford one yet, but I knew I'd need one badly. I'd have to earn more coins fast. I woke up the next morning and panicked when I saw Z's bed empty. But he walked in a moment later carrying a basin of water he'd fetched for me. I almost cried. For a second I thought finding him had just been a dream. After washing up, we went to the state-run restaurant for breakfast. 2 big meat buns and a bowl of sweet soy milk each. Z asked about the money, and I told him I'd already gotten our 2 shares back from Songjinjin. He cheered right up. Then I explained my plan. My household registration was temporarily at the street office in the north part of the city. Our parents had been sent to a province far in the north. The only way for us to get there was to volunteer to go to the countryside. I'd figure out Z's registration once we arrived. We went to the supply store and I bought pastries, candy, and a dried chicken as gifts because I needed to visit Yang Lifin's family and ask her mother for help arranging our transfer to the countryside. You can't show up empty-handed when asking a favor. I also bought Z some of his favorite almond cookies and fruit candy to snack on. We found Yang Lifin's new home near the machinery factory. She was thrilled to see Z and immediately noticed how much we looked alike. She spoiled him with candy and pinched his cheeks, completely charmed. I told her my plan. I wanted to go to the countryside in the same province where our parents had been sent. She was shocked. Everyone else in this era was running away from people labeled as political criminals. People were publishing notices in newspapers cutting ties with their own parents and siblings just to protect themselves. But I was doing the opposite, going toward my parents on purpose. Yang Lifin tried to talk me out of it, but when she saw my mind was made up, she agreed to ask her mother for help when she got home. After that, I checked us into a better guest house nearby and took Z shopping for everything we needed: basins, towels, toothbrushes, cups, lunch boxes. Then I started planning a trip to the department store for clothes. We were heading to a cold northern region where temperatures dropped sharply at night, even in summer. I had almost nothing, and Z's warm clothes had all been sold off by that awful family. There was a lot to buy, but at least we had enough money and ration tickets. Z and I spent the morning at the department store. We bought winter clothes for ourselves and for our parents too. I also got cotton fabric for making undergarments I'd learned to sew in college and 2 thick cotton quilts. We couldn't carry more than that. Back at the guest house, I made sure Z had lunch, secretly added some nutrition liquid to his water, and told him to stay in the room while I went out. He was nervous about being left alone, so I promised I'd never leave him. That seemed to calm him down. I took a bus out to the outskirts of the city to hunt for things to scan. The streets looked like old photographs: blue sky, gray buildings, everyone dressed in black, blue, or gray. I found an empty field and started scanning wild plants, but most were types I'd already collected. I only earned 45 more coins. At this rate, I'd never reach 500 for a storage unit. Then I spotted a small forest nearby. I figured trees would be worth more than grass. And I was right. A tall pine tree gave me 100 coins. A cypress tree with seeds on it was worth 300. I tested my theory by scanning a weed that had seeds and got 30 coins instead of the usual 5. Plants with seeds were clearly worth much more. I spent over an hour crawling through the forest, scanning insects, earthworms, and every different plan I could find. By the end, I'd earned 670 coins that day. Combined with what I already had, my total reached 750. Without hesitating, I bought a 1 cubic meter storage unit for 500 coins. It looked small, but it could hold a surprising amount, enough to stuff in winter coats and quilts. Now I could stockpile supplies before heading north. I was planning my next shopping trip when I heard a woman screaming for help from the southwest. A man was laughing and cursing. He was threatening a young woman, calling her names, accusing her of cheating on him. She begged him to stop and threatened to call the police. He didn't care. Then I heard the sound of clothing being ripped. I knocked the man out with a rock just before he could assault the woman. When she got up, I expected some gratitude, but instead, she tried to trick me. She asked me to lend her my shirt since hers was torn, saying she'd go home and come back with a replacement. But I could tell she planned to take my clothes and disappear, leaving me stranded half-dressed in the forest. I played along. I told her I lived nearby and would go get her something to wear. She panicked and tried to stop me, but I walked away. Instead of getting clothes, I went straight to the police station and reported everything: the attempted assault, the man named Fong Daniu, and the woman Zhao Xiaomei still waiting in the forest. The officers rushed out on bicycles to the scene. Zhao Xiaomei was horrified when she saw police and villagers arriving instead of me with fresh clothes. She blamed me in her heart. If I'd just given her my shirt, nobody would have known what happened. Now, everyone would find out. She hated me for doing the right thing.
I didn't know any of that.
I was already at the department store, shopping for supplies. I bought 2 more cotton quilts for pairs of thick winter shoes for me, Z, and our parents, and as much food as I could with my remaining ration tickets. Rice, flour, noodles, pastries, cooking oil, and seasonings. I ducked into an empty alley and scanned everything into my new storage unit. The system automatically organized the space perfectly. After storing everything, I still had half the unit left. I got back to the guest house before 5, took Z out for dinner, and packed extra steamed buns for breakfast. That night, after Z fell asleep, I climbed out the window and made my way through the dark, empty streets to Song Weigua's apartment building. There were no streetlights, no people, not even a shadow. I moved silently along the walls. I climbed the outer wall to the second floor and slipped in through the living room window. The latch had been broken for ages. They'd never bothered to fix it properly. I squeezed through without making a sound. That night, I used a tiny vial of knockout drug I'd bought from the system shop for 100 star coins. Just 1 milliliter could put an elephant to sleep. I dripped some onto a handkerchief and held it under each person's nose. Song Weigua, Li Shulan, Song Jinjin, and their son Song Hongwei. They all passed out cold. First, I searched Song Jinjin's suitcase. Most of the money was already gone. Song Weigua and Li Shulan had clearly taken it from her. Only about 100 yuan was left. I took it all. Then I noticed something shifting inside the case. I felt around carefully and found a hidden compartment lined with nylon cloth. Inside was a set of beautiful imperial green jade jewelry and several heavy gold pieces, things from my real parents' home. I took everything. Next, I went to Song Weigua and Li Shulan's room. From the original Song Yun's memories, I knew exactly where they hid their money, in a metal box wedged under the wardrobe. Inside was 1,353 yuan in cash, various ration tickets, and a savings book with 900 yuan. Most of it had clearly been squeezed out of Song Jinjin. I took all of it. I also opened their wardrobe and found 6 quilts, including 2 brand new ones Li Shulan had recently made. I took every single one, plus a thermos from the top of the cabinet. Then I climbed back out the window, wiped away any footprints, and slipped back to the guest house in the dark. The next morning, a scream rang through the apartment building. Li Shulan discovered the empty metal box and started wailing. Song Weigua told the neighbors they'd been robbed. The police came but found no clues, nothing out of place, no evidence at all. Song Jinjin stood there silently furious. She'd lost everything, the money, the hidden jewelry, all of it. She blamed me, but also blamed Song Weigua and Li Shulan for forcing her to hand over her money in the first place. The only hope she had left was marrying Ding Jianya. Meanwhile, Z and I were happily eating breakfast at the state restaurant. Afterward, I brought meat buns to Yang Lifan's house as a gift and arrived early enough to catch her mother, Zhang Hongmei, before work. Zhang Hongmei was warm and kind. She fussed over Z and scolded me gently for spending money on gifts, reminding me of my master from my previous life, who always pretended to be annoyed by presents, but secretly loved them. When I brought up going to the countryside, Zhang Hongmei sat me down with a serious look. She'd looked into the area where my parents had been sent. It was deep in the mountains, truly harsh conditions. She asked if I really understood what I was getting into, a young girl with a small brother, heading to such a difficult place. I told Zhang Hongmei not to worry about me. I explained that since I'd cut ties with Song Weigu's family and had no job, going to the countryside was my only option anyway. I'd rather go where my real parents were than anywhere else. She agreed to help and said there was a group of young people being sent to the northern province in 3 days. Nobody wanted to go to that remote mountain area, so getting spots was easy. She also got us sleeper tickets on the train since Z was still hurt and couldn't sit in hard seats for that long. Before I left, I secretly slipped a traditional medicine prescription into Yang Lifan's pocket. It was for treating liver disease. I knew from my medical training that Zhang Hongmei was sick and the hospitals hadn't been able to help her. In this era, skilled traditional doctors had been persecuted, so nobody dared practice openly. I couldn't give the prescription directly without raising dangerous questions, so I left it where they'd find it after I was gone. On the morning we left, Yang Lifan and her mother sent us off with boiled eggs, braised fish, and date cakes. I promised to write as soon as we arrived. We said goodbye with tears in our eyes. What I didn't know was that Zhang Hongmei deeply regretted helping me sign up. She'd looked into the records and found that almost nobody sent to that mountain region survived more than a year. The conditions were deadly. People froze or got sick and died. That's exactly why nobody volunteered to go there. Z and I rode in the sleeper car while the other young people sat in hard seats. When we all gathered at the provincial capital, the group finally noticed me. I explained simply that Z was my brother, and we had no family left. Most people felt sympathy. But then I heard a familiar voice challenge me. Isn't this against the rules? It was Zhao Xiaomei, the woman I'd saved in the forest. She stared at me with pure hatred in her eyes. I was surprised when Zhao Xiaomei openly attacked me in front of everyone. She loudly declared that bringing my brother was against the rules and accused me of being a capitalist, coming to the countryside to enjoy myself. She even threatened to report me. I didn't hold back. I told the group exactly what had happened, how I'd saved her from being assaulted by a man named Fong Daniu, and now she was repaying my kindness with hostility. The crowd went silent. Everyone looked at her differently after that. Then I pointed out something obvious. She had originally been assigned to a comfortable farming community near the capital. Why would anyone leave such a good place to come suffer in this remote province? Everyone immediately understood there was a story behind her transfer. The male volunteer who had been flirting with her all trip suddenly moved far away from her, his expression turning cold. Zhao Xiaomei was furious and shaking, but she had no way to fight back. The group leader finally stepped in and told everyone to stop arguing and grab their luggage before we missed the next bus. Nobody wanted to walk with Zhao Xiaomei after that. Only 2 soft-hearted girls helped her carry her things. We traveled all day, bus after bus, until we reached the county town by 2 in the afternoon. All 16 of us were assigned to the same commune. 8 went to one village with a tractor to pick them up. The rest of us, including me and, unfortunately, Zhao Xiaomei, were assigned to Qinghe village. We got a slow ox cart instead. The village leader, Lu Xiangqian, looked us over with obvious annoyance. He grumbled about getting more city kids who couldn't do farm work. When he noticed Z, he came over and asked me about him. I explained that our parents were gone, and I had no relatives to leave him with. Before he could object, I assured him that I'd handle all of Z's food and needs myself. He wouldn't cost the village anything. The village leader, Lu Xiangqian, softened a little when I promised Z wouldn't be a burden. But Zhao Xiaomei kept stirring trouble, pointing out that Z would still use village resources if he stayed at the youth dormitory. A male volunteer backed her up, asking where an 8-year-old boy would even sleep. I already had a plan. Living in the crowded dormitory wouldn't work anyway. I needed privacy to secretly look after my parents nearby. I asked Lu Xiangqian if there were any empty houses in the village I could rent. He said there might be one, but it was in bad shape. On the road, I offered him some almond cookies. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. After that, he warmed up to me and answered all my questions freely. I learned that Qinghe village sat at the foot of Black Horse Mountain, had about 100 families, and was relatively well off because of the nearby mountain resources. Nobody had ever starved there, even in the worst years. I carefully asked about empty houses away from the main village. He mentioned an abandoned courtyard. Nobody wanted it because someone had hanged themselves there years ago. The family line had died out. Even better, it was close to the cattle shed, which I knew was where political prisoners like my parents were kept. Villagers avoided that whole area out of superstition.
It was perfect.
I told him I'd pay to fix up the house myself. We agreed on a deal. I'd repair it at my own expense and have long-term rental rights. The village would keep ownership and collect rent. When I eventually left, the house would go back to the village. He liked that arrangement. He took me and Z to see the place while the other volunteers waited at the dormitory. The moment I left, Zhao Xiaomei went over to inspect my luggage, kicking my bundles and eyeing my leather suitcase with jealousy. She loudly called me a capitalist's daughter, claiming the expensive suitcase proved it. But an older female volunteer named Cheng Yan shut her down immediately. My family has 2 of those suitcases. So everyone who owns one is a capitalist now. Zhao Xiaomei had nothing to say to that. The abandoned courtyard was a mess. The gate fell over when I pushed it, and weeds grew taller than me. But I loved it. All those wild plants meant star coins. The house was big, 2 main rooms, 2 side rooms, a kitchen, and a firewood shed out back. The previous owner must have been well off. Unfortunately, most of the rooms had collapsed heating platforms or holes in the roof. Only the firewood shed was usable after cleanup. I told Lu Xiangqian I'd take it. We went to the village office and signed a rental agreement, 2 yuan a month for the whole courtyard. I paid a full year up front. He estimated repairs would cost about 60 yuan, rebuilding walls with mud bricks, fixing the roof with proper materials to survive the harsh winters, and rebuilding the heated sleeping platforms. That was a lot of money for this area, but I handed it over without hesitating. I told him to hire as many workers as he needed to finish quickly. He seemed impressed that I trusted him so completely on our first day of knowing each other. He promised to do a good job. He invited Z and me to eat dinner at his house, since we had no way to cook yet. I accepted. It was also a chance to thank him properly with some of the food I'd brought. Back at the youth dormitory, everyone else had already been assigned sleeping spots. My luggage sat alone in the yard. A friendly older volunteer named Li Wan introduced herself as the women's group leader. She was clearly relieved when I told her I'd found my own place. The dormitory was already full. She helped me carry my things to the courtyard. She also invited me to a welcome dinner at the dormitory, but I politely declined. After what happened with Zhao Xiaomei and the cold attitude from the other volunteers, I didn't feel like socializing. I told Li when I needed to clean up the house and would eat at Lu Xiangqian's place while discussing the repairs. Li Wan was shocked when she saw the place I'd rented. She thought I'd been scammed. The house was a wreck and everyone knew someone had died there. She said I could have built a whole new house for the money I was spending on repairs. I explained that as outsiders, we couldn't get land to build on. This courtyard had 4 rooms, and once fixed up, it would be worth every penny. She eventually accepted my reasoning and left. Z and I spent the rest of the day scrubbing the firewood shed until it was livable. Just before dark, a shy teenage girl came to fetch us for dinner. Her name was Lu Fangfang. She was the village leader's daughter. She was 15, hadn't passed her high school entrance exam, and now did light farm work like cutting pig grass on the mountain. I asked if she could take me to cut pig grass the next day. She warned me the work points were low and assignments were usually decided by the team leader, but she seemed excited about the idea. We chatted the whole walk to her house and quickly became comfortable with each other. At Lu Xiangqian's home, I met his son Liu Hongbing, who worked at the commune's machinery station. The poor guy took one look at me and completely lost the ability to speak. He stuttered through his own name with a face as red as a tomato. His father shoved him toward the kitchen to spare him further embarrassment. Liu Xiangqian's wife, Wang Juping, was warm and generous. She handed Z and me each a boiled egg and apologized for having nothing fancy. I liked her immediately. I'd brought gifts, 2 packages of fine pastries from the capital and 2 packs of premium cigarettes. I knew I'd need Liu Xiangqian's help many times in the future, especially with my parents' situation nearby, so I made sure the gifts were generous. I slipped them to Wang Juping in a plain cloth bag. She accepted without looking inside, probably assuming it was just some canned food. When she set the bag down in the kitchen, her daughter-in-law immediately peeked inside. When Wang Juping finally looked inside the bag I'd given her, she panicked. 2 packages of fine pastries and 2 packs of premium Dakium cigarettes. That was a seriously expensive gift, especially out here. Her greedy daughter-in-law, Li Danny, had already tried to sneak a piece of pastry, and Wang Juping had to snatch it away before she ate everything and sent the rest to her own parents' house. Wang Juping called Liu Xiangqian to the kitchen. When he saw the cigarettes, his eyes went wide. He'd only ever smoked Dakium when officials shared 1 or 2 during holidays. He couldn't even get the ration tickets to buy them. He tried to return everything. I refused firmly. I told him if he wouldn't accept, I'd cancel the house repairs, and we wouldn't stay for dinner either. I said I couldn't shamelessly let him do so much work for a stranger without at least showing proper thanks. He reluctantly accepted, his face red, and made me promise this would be the only time. Dinner was wonderful. Fong Fong kept piling the best dishes into my bowl and Z's. Wang Juping lent us her only thermos filled with hot water and a clay pot, so we could at least cook porridge. Liu Xiangqian insisted his son Hongbing walk us home in the dark. Poor Hongbing. He still couldn't look at me without turning bright red. After we left, Liu Xiangqian told his family I was a pitiful person despite seeming well off, no parents, a little brother to raise, already excluded by the other volunteers. Hongbing eagerly volunteered to help repair my house for free the next day. His father scolded him. Working for free would only damage my reputation and make people gossip. Then Wang Juping delivered the final blow. Hongbing, a girl like her, is out of your league. She'd never be interested. Give up now. Liu Xiangqian winced at his wife's bluntness, but didn't disagree. I didn't know about any of that. I was already planning my next move. Earlier, I'd casually gotten the cattle shed's location from Fong Fong. Once it was late enough, I'd take Z there to find our parents. I told Z to sleep first. He was exhausted and passed out immediately. While he slept, I went to the front yard and scanned the overgrown weeds. Most had seeds, so I earned 110 star coins, bringing my total to 260. But weeds alone wouldn't make me rich. My real target was Black Horse Mountain. During dinner, I'd already gotten Liu Xiangqian to agree to let me cut pig grass on the mountain. That would give me a reason to go near the cattle shed and earn star coins in the forest at the same time. While waiting for it to get late enough, I built a simple stone stove in the yard, used the clay pot Wang Juping lent me, and cooked a thick pot of rice porridge. I packed some pastries, candles, and matches to bring along. At 11, Z and I slipped out. The area around our courtyard was completely deserted. No neighbors, no one watching. We climbed a small hill called Sunny Slope at the foot of Black Horse Mountain. The cattle shed was there, far from the village because the villagers hadn't wanted it near their homes. When we got closer, I saw it was just a large grass hut divided into several rooms. My heart sank. This thing would collapse under winter snow. Z spotted a familiar shirt hanging on one of the doors. "That's Dad's," he whispered. Then we heard harsh coughing from inside. Z grabbed my hand, eyes filling with tears. "That's Dad." I pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. People in their situation weren't allowed locks. Z rushed in and covered our father's mouth before he could shout. When Song Hao recognized his son's voice, he froze in shock. He looked terrible. The man who had once been handsome and refined now appeared 10 years older, thin and exhausted. He was exactly like my father from my previous life. the same face. Identical. When he saw me, he realized immediately who I was. He reached out his hand, voice trembling. "I'm sorry, child. We failed you." I took his hand. His palms were covered in open cuts, hands that should have been holding books and pens. Then I looked at the bed behind him. My mother was lying there, breathing in short, labored gasps. I lit a candle and sat beside her. I couldn't bring myself to look at her face right away. Instead, I took her wrist and checked her pulse, a skill from my past life training in traditional medicine. My father watched in shock. He hadn't expected his daughter to know medicine. After half a minute, I had my answer. "She has pneumonia. It's serious." I looked at my father. "You have it too, but milder." He panicked. They'd never be allowed to go to a hospital for treatment. I squeezed his hand and told him not to worry. I knew how to treat pneumonia. I didn't need a hospital. I'd find the right herbs on the mountain tomorrow. I promised him I would save her. My words seemed to calm my father. He said that even though we'd just met, he felt no distance between us, as if we'd been father and daughter for a lifetime. He trusted me completely. When he heard from Z what Song Jinjin had done, he was devastated. He'd raised her with love for years, and she'd repaid him by abandoning his son with strangers. He'd even been happy for her when she proved she wasn't his biological child, thinking she'd escape the family's punishment. He'd trusted her with Z's life. While Z told the story, I tended to my mother. She was nearly unconscious, burning with fever, barely breathing properly. I secretly mixed nutrition liquid and a fever reducer for my system into some water and fed it to her spoon by spoon. After a few sips, she started swallowing on her own. Her breathing gradually steadied, and a bit of color returned to her face. Even if I couldn't find the right herbs tomorrow, the nutrition liquid could at least keep her from getting worse. I gave my father the porridge I'd brought, also mixed with nutrition liquid. He was starving, hadn't eaten a proper meal since his punishment began, surviving on thin wild vegetable soup and rough grain. But after just 1 cup of porridge, he felt completely full, and even his coughing eased. He was confused by this, not knowing about the nutrition liquid's effects. I told him I'd need to take the clay pot back to brew medicine once I found herbs on the mountain. He worried about us visiting too often, but couldn't refuse with my mother so sick. Before leaving, I told him the darkness wouldn't last forever. The chaos was just a storm before the rainbow. Things would get better, we just had to hold on. He looked at me with renewed hope in his eyes and smiled for what seemed like the first time in a long while. After we left, my father noticed the candle I'd given him, the first light he'd seen at night since arriving. He took some pastries, 2 candles, and a full cup of porridge to the neighboring shed, where 2 elderly men lived, Old Chi and Old Mo. They'd heard everything through the thin walls, but had pretended not to. Old Chi had a badly broken leg that had gone untreated for weeks, swollen and possibly permanently damaged. Old Mo was so malnourished he could barely stand, seeing stars constantly, on the verge of collapsing for good. Neither of them was allowed medical care or even permitted to leave the village. After my father shared the porridge and pastries with Old Chi and Old Mo next door, both elderly men slept well for the first time in ages. The porridge, secretly mixed with nutrition liquid, eased their hunger and even seemed to relieve some of Old Chi's leg pain. I also slept well that night. For the first time since arriving in this era, I felt some peace knowing my parents were alive. I woke at 6 to my new alarm clock and cooked plain noodles with salt and sesame oil for breakfast. I sent Z to return Wang Juping's thermos and fetch water from their well. Our courtyard had an old well, but it was broken. I'd need to ask Lu Xiangqian about getting it fixed. Carrying water from the village well was too far and too inconvenient. We made it to the village meeting area right at 7. None of the new volunteers had arrived yet, only some of us old ones. Lu Xiangqian called me over and loudly announced that since I was still recovering from illness, I should go cut pig grass with Fong Fong. That was the cover story he'd arranged, so I could work near the mountain. Fong Fong grabbed my hand excitedly and took me to get tools, sickles and woven baskets for our backs. She even found a small one for Z. She taught me to identify all the different types of grass that pigs could eat, and Z learned alongside us. After a while, I suggested we split up to work faster. Once Fong Fong was out of sight and Z was busy cutting grass, I slipped deeper into the mountain. The forest was rich with different plants and trees. I focused on scanning mature trees with flowers or fruit. They were worth the most. One large camphor tree loaded with seeds earned me 500 star coins. In total, I earned 1,200 coins without taking too many trees from any one area. While cutting pig grass, I also searched for herbs to treat my mother's severe pneumonia. From my medical training, I knew herbs alone wouldn't be enough. What she really needed was my acupuncture and massage techniques. But I had no silver needles. I'd searched all over the capital without finding any. And my ancient massage method required internal energy that this body hadn't yet developed. For now, herbs would have to do. If I could just stop the disease from getting worse, I'd buy time to find needles, maybe from a rural doctor or a traditional healer hiding out in the countryside. I spent the morning on the mountain collecting herbs while also scanning plants for star coins. Medicinal herbs were worth much more than regular weeds. One windbreak herb gave me 30 coins, oxney 50, bellflower 30, astragalus 60. Combined with the trees I'd scanned earlier, I earned 1,860 coins that morning, bringing my total to 2,120. Fong Fong had been worried when she couldn't find me and Z. I told her we'd gone deeper into the mountain looking for pig grass. She noticed the herbs I was carrying, and I admitted I knew a little medicine, but asked her to keep it secret. She agreed eagerly, looking at me like I was some kind of hero. Back at the courtyard, I was pleased to find that workers had already cleared the weeds, dug up the ground, and removed rotten wood and broken bricks. Lu Xiangqian moved fast. I turned in my pig grass at the village office, more than Fong Fong had collected, and got 2 work points. Then I told them I needed the afternoon off to buy supplies. I ran into Lu Xiangqian, who updated me on the repairs. Everything was arranged, materials ordered, workers scheduled, heating platform builders hired. 10 days at most. When I mentioned the broken well, he said his cousin-in-law was a well digger and could come fix it easily. He also told me I could buy water buckets from the village carpenter and water jars from a family in the next village, cheaper than the supply store and no ration tickets needed. Old Zhang at the cattle shed could drive me there by ox cart. This was perfect. Going to the cattle shed to arrange the ride gave me an excuse to visit my parents. I hurried home, cooked a full pot of noodles, ate with Z, and carried the rest to the cattle shed. On the way, I passed a suspicious-looking woman who eyed me and my food, but said nothing. I was glad I'd left Z behind. I called out loudly for old Zhang. A limping old man in a patched jacket came out. He agreed to take me to buy water jars that afternoon and said he'd wait at the village entrance with a cart. The moment he walked away, I slipped into my parents' shed. Inside the shed, my father was feeding water to my mother, who had woken up but was still very weak. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. She could see the resemblance. My face looked just like hers when she was young. She called herself an undeserving parent. Her daughter should have grown up loved and comfortable, but instead I'd suffered because of their carelessness, switched at birth, mistreated for years. And now I'd given up city life to come to this remote place just for them. She wanted to hug me but held back, afraid her pneumonia might be contagious.
I didn't care about that.
I took the water bowl and fed her myself, secretly adding a bit of nutrition liquid when she wasn't looking. She noticed the water tasted slightly sweeter, but didn't think much of it. While my father ate the noodles I'd brought, I asked about the cattle shed situation. He told me 6 people lived there, my parents, 2 former military leaders named Old Chi and Old Mo, and a strange couple from a research institute who kept to themselves. Old Chi and Old Mo were good people suffering unfairly, just like my parents. Old Chi's broken leg was getting worse every day, and Old Mo was dangerously weak from malnutrition. I asked if Lu Xiangqian was preventing them from seeing a doctor. My father shook his head. The village people weren't the problem. It was the Revolutionary Committee officials who came around. They were violent. My mother tried to downplay it, saying they just had to endure. but I could read between the lines. My fists clenched with anger. I had to leave to meet old Zhang for the ox cart ride. I told my parents I'd come back that evening and left them to eat. Back at the courtyard, I asked Z to stay behind, to dry the herbs I'd gathered and watch our belongings while workers came to repair the house. When I reached the village entrance, I spotted Zhao Xiaomei and another female volunteer standing by old Zhang's ox cart, looking unhappy about something. When I arrived at the village entrance, Zhao Xiaomei was harassing old Zhang, demanding to use the ox cart. She accused him of class division for not letting her ride, her usual trick of throwing around political labels to bully people. But old Zhang wasn't intimidated. He'd spent his life around people who threw those labels, and he came from 8 generations of poor farmers. No political hat could stick to him. He calmly told her the cart was already reserved, and she could tag along if she was going the same direction. Otherwise, too bad. I walked past Zhao Xiaomei without even looking at her and spoke directly to the other volunteer, Chen Meili. She said they'd wanted to go to the town's second-hand shop for cheap wooden boxes. I mentioned that the village carpenter could make them without needing ration tickets, and casually said I'd like to visit the second-hand shop myself sometime. Chen Meili relaxed. She'd clearly expected me to look down on her for bargain shopping. We introduced ourselves properly and parted on good terms. As the ox cart pulled away, I could feel Zhao Xiaomei's hateful stare on my back. Chen Meili must have felt it too, because she suddenly got a stomachache and ran back to the dormitory rather than go anywhere with Zhao Xiaomei alone. Zhao Xiaomei ended up going to the village carpenter with 2 other new volunteers, but she haggled so aggressively and said so many rude things that the carpenter threw her out. The other girls didn't get to buy anything either. Meanwhile, old Zhang took me to the neighboring village where old Li made pottery. The 2 old men were actually relatives and clearly fond of each other. Old Li's daughter-in-law showed me around the yard full of handmade clay jars, pots, bowls, and basins. Nothing fancy, but solid and practical. I bought generously. 2 large water jars, 5 clay pots, 20 bowls, 20 plates, 2 basins, and several pickling crocks. It came to 29 yuan. The daughter-in-law was so happy, she gave me a bonus teapot. When I saw it, I immediately thought of my parents. They needed something like this at the cattle shed. I asked to buy 2 more. Old Li overheard and happily gave them to me for free, thrilled that someone appreciated his work. On the ride home, I noticed old Zhang's tobacco pipe was cracked and empty. He clearly hadn't smoked in a long time. I quietly slipped 2 packs of premium dakium and cigarettes into his cloth bag when he wasn't looking. Old Zhang helped me bring all the pottery back to the courtyard. The village workers who were repairing the house came out to help unload everything. They all stared at me. Clearly I was the first pretty city girl they'd seen around here. I didn't mind the attention. I apologized for not being able to feed them lunch, since I had nothing, not even a stove or clean water. I promised to treat everyone to a big meal once the repairs were finished. That cheered them up, and they went back to work with extra energy. I left Z, wiping down the new pots and jars while I went to find the village carpenter, Lu. When I arrived, he was in a terrible mood, probably from dealing with Zhao Xiaomei earlier. He almost chased me away, but his wife, Auntie Qian, pulled me inside warmly. I bought water buckets, a carrying pole, foot washing tubs, a water drawing bucket for the well, a cutting board, and a small wooden table that could double as Z's desk. I cleared out half their stock. Auntie Qian was thrilled, and even the grumpy carpenter started smiling. Then came my first ever experience carrying water with a shoulder pole. It took technique, not just strength. My first trip back, the buckets were only half full. But I learned quickly, and by the second trip I managed to keep them mostly full. The village workers offered to help, but I refused every time. It took me over a dozen trips to fill both water jars. By then, it was almost dark. I told Z we'd cut bamboo on the mountain tomorrow to weave covers for the water jars, a simple craft I'd learned in a college club in my previous life. Once the workers left, I started cooking. I boiled a big pot of rice porridge in the new clay pot. While it simmered, I taught Z how to build a proper stone stove, explaining the method and the principles behind it. Every survival skill he learned could help him someday. On a smaller stove, I set up a clay pot to brew the medicinal herbs I'd gathered that morning. They'd been drying all afternoon in the sun, and were ready to use. While I brewed the medicine, Z asked if it was for our mother. I told him it would help reduce inflammation in her lungs. Not an instant cure, but enough to ease her suffering while her body slowly recovered. He asked how I knew so much, and I told him I learned from books. He promised to study hard too. That reminded me I'd forgotten to ask Lu Xiangqian about getting Z enrolled in school. Dinner was plain porridge again. Z said it was better than meat, which made me laugh. That kid really knows how to make someone feel good. We headed to the cattle shed earlier tonight, around 8 instead of midnight. My father was already watching for us at the door. I checked my mother's pulse first. She was slightly better than yesterday. I poured her a bowl of the herbal medicine I'd brewed, and left a second bowl for morning. I'd also brought white sugar, so she could chase away the bitter taste. She'd always hated bitter medicine, and I wanted to give her that small comfort. She held the sugar in her mouth and got emotional. She couldn't help comparing me to Song Jinjin, who had been selfish from the start, never caring about her parents when they were sick, only taking, never giving. Now she finally understood that some people are just born that way, and no amount of love can change them. While Z excitedly told our father about our day, my father hesitated, then asked if I knew how to set broken bones. He wanted me to look at old cheese leg next door. The two old men had protected my parents when they first arrived, standing between them and the people who came to abuse them. I went to their shed with my father. Old Amo opened the door, thinking we'd brought food again and feeling guilty about it. When the candlelight revealed me, he immediately noticed my resemblance to my mother but said nothing. My father had introduced me simply as Comrade Song, a young volunteer who knows some medicine. I examined old cheese leg. It was a fracture that had become infected from weeks without treatment. Old Mo asked desperately what we could do. The committee officials would never allow a hospital visit. I told them not to worry. I'd gather anti-inflammatory herbs from the mountain tomorrow, apply them by noon, and set the bone by evening. It was manageable and would definitely heal. Both old men relaxed, grateful and encouraged. I told them we had to help each other through these dark times. A brighter future was waiting if we could just hold on. They were tough men with strong spirits, and my words seemed to lift them even more. We left the cattle shed, and I gave my parents a clay pot with plenty of porridge. My father's spirits were improving. 2 days of real meals and less worry had eased his coughing and helped him sleep. The next morning, Z and I arrived at the work area 10 minutes earlier than the day before. But Fong Fong wasn't there. Lu Xiangqian told me she had a fever. She'd always had a weak constitution and got sick often. He seemed worried but said they had leftover medicine at home. Without Fong Fong, I'd need to collect extra pig grass on my own. Z and I headed to the river, where the grass grew thick and tender. The river was wide, at least 50 meters across, with deep water full of fish and shrimp. I wasn't planning to fish, but a fat bighead fish kept leaping out of the water right in front of me, practically taunting me. I couldn't resist. I cut some willow branches and wove a simple scoop net, using a hair tie to secure the handle. Z watched, skeptical that this flimsy thing could catch anything. I picked up some small stones and waited at the water's edge. After about 15 minutes, the bighead fish finally jumped again. I flicked a stone with perfect aim, smacking it right on its fat head. It splashed back into the water, then floated up belly first. One quick scoop and I had it, 6 or 7 pounds of fish. Z's jaw dropped. He'd seen people fish with rods and spears before, but never like this. He begged me to teach him. I told him it took lots of practice, and he immediately started throwing pebbles at targets while I gathered herbs in the forest. I earned another 180 star coins from herbs, bringing my total to 2,350. Thinking about old cheese broken leg, I bought a special bone-mending bandage from the system shop for 200 coins. Regular treatment would take months, and those officials would never let him rest that long. The bandage would speed up healing significantly. I also dug up wild onions and garlic to cook with the fish. Before heading home, I had Z sneak the fish in through the back gate. I was new here, If people saw me eating fish before anyone else had any, jealous gossip would follow. Better to stay low-key. When I turned in my pig grass, the scorekeeper was impressed. 2 full baskets plus an extra bundle. I told him my brother helped, and we found a thick patch by the river. He gave me 3 work points and said I didn't need to work that afternoon. Instead of going straight home, I visited Fong Fong. Wang Juping was in the yard feeding chickens and looked worried. She told me Fong Fong had been asking about me that morning, concerned I'd get lost without her. It was clear Fong Fong had no real friends. The other village girls avoided her because she was always sick and couldn't run or play. Fong Fong tried to get out of bed when she heard my voice, but her mother pushed her back down. I sat beside her and quietly took her pulse while she distracted her mother by asking for water. Wang Juping noticed what I was doing. She was sharp, but she played along and left the room. Fong Fong still had a mild fever. She'd gone outside several times during the night without putting on warm clothes. I told her that her weak constitution was something she'd been born with. She smiled sadly and mentioned that an old doctor named Grandpa Fei in Gizi village had told her she wouldn't live past 18. She was already 16. I squeezed her hand and promised her I could treat her condition. I told her she'd live well past 18, all the way to 99. She laughed, but behind us in the doorway, Wang Juping was quietly holding back tears. On my walk home, I worked out a prescription in my head. All common herbs except for one, ginseng. I wrote it down and gave it to Fong Fong later, telling her to have her parents gather the ingredients. She looked discouraged when she saw the ginseng. It was expensive and hard to find. I told her we lived next to Black Horse Mountain. Someone might have found wild ginseng up there. Then I asked about Grandpa Fei. She confirmed he was a traditional doctor from a medical family and that he secretly practiced acupuncture, but nobody was supposed to know. That was exactly what I needed to hear. If he had silver needles, my mother's treatment could move much faster. Meanwhile, back at our courtyard, I cooked a big head fish I'd caught that morning, split into 2 pots since it was too large for one. I fried both halves until golden and added hot water and simmered them into rich soup with wild greens. I brought a big pot of fish soup to Lu Xiangqian's family. When he asked where I got the fish, I told him I'd found it floating belly up in the river while cutting grass. His daughter-in-law, Li Danny, immediately wanted me to show her where, convinced she could find fish too. Wang Juping rolled her eyes and told her not to be ridiculous. I brought fish soup to the cattle shed, secretly adding nutrition liquid along the way. I didn't want to use the more powerful mid-level nutrition liquid yet. If my parents suddenly looked too healthy, those officials would get suspicious. They needed to look like they were suffering, at least on the surface. My mother was doing better. She could sit up and eat at the table now. My father poured all of her thin vegetable porridge into his own bowl and filled hers with fish soup instead. She scolded him for not eating enough himself. I could see the guilt in her eyes. They'd been sent here mainly because of her. She had family overseas, and someone had used that against them. My father had refused to divorce her, choosing to suffer alongside her. What I didn't know was that my mother was keeping a secret. She had never told anyone, not even my father, about the true extent of the White family's assets. If she could survive and return to the capital, she could reclaim property that would secure our whole family's future. I brought fish soup to Old Chi and Old Amo next door too. Then I cleaned Old Chi's injured leg, applied the herbal paste I'd prepared, and wrapped it carefully with cotton bandages. I told him if the swelling went down by evening, I could set the bone tonight. Old Chi was deeply moved, a young girl treating his dirty, smelly wound without any disgust. I couldn't handle seeing his teary eyes, so I left quickly. That afternoon, I took Z into the mountain to hunt. We needed real food. I couldn't keep feeding everyone plain porridge and noodles. I spotted movement in the grass and flicked 2 stones in quick succession. 2 fat rabbits, 4 or 5 pounds each, dead instantly, both hit perfectly in the head. Z was amazed. He couldn't even see the rabbits before I threw. I told him he'd be just as good if he kept practicing. We also collected bags full of wild vegetables, enough to eat fresh and dry some for winter. Then we headed toward a bamboo grove. I didn't have an axe, so I quietly bought a knife from the system shop to cut bamboo with. Z's eyes went wide when he saw the knife I used to cut bamboo. I told him I'd bought it on the black market in the capital and made him promise to tell anyone who asked that it was a family heirloom. The knife was incredible. It cut through everything like butter. But it was also dangerous, so I decided to keep it stored in my system when not in use. We dragged 2 bamboo poles back to the courtyard. The workers were still busy repairing the house and asked what the bamboo was for. I told them I knew some weaving and planned to make baskets, mats, and screens myself to save money. They lost interest immediately. Bamboo weaving was common around here. I snuck down to the river to clean the 2 rabbits I'd caught earlier, keeping out of sight. I saved the rabbit fur for making gloves later and planned to ask Lu Xiangqian how to treat the skins properly. Once all the workers left for the evening, I started cooking. 1 rabbit I braised with seasoning for Z and me. The other I stewed plain for my parents, since they were sick and needed gentle food. I set aside a bowl for Fong Fong too. 2 whole rabbits sounds like a lot, but split between so many people, nothing was left over. Still, it was real meat at last, and Z and I were both satisfied. He wished we had bread to soak up the sauce. I promised him that once the house was finished, I'd make him steamed buns, meat buns, fancy rolls, everything. I brought the stewed rabbit to Fong Fong's house. Wang Juping took the entire bowl straight to Fong Fong's room, shut the door and windows, and turned to me with desperate eyes. Tell me honestly, can that prescription really cure my daughter? She was gripping my hand so tightly it almost hurt. I told her sincerely that if they gathered all the herbs, it would definitely help. The exact results would depend on Fong Fong's response and treatment might need adjusting, but there would be improvement. She let go of my hand, pressed her chest, and teared up with relief. She'd spent years and nearly all the family's savings searching for a cure, enduring complaints from her in-laws. She'd almost given up hope as Fong Fong approached 18 and kept getting weaker. She started thinking out loud about where to find ginseng, mentioning Grandpa Fei in Gizi village. My ears perked up immediately. He was the traditional doctor who secretly did acupuncture. I asked her to take me along when she went to see him. I told her I could check whether any ginseng he had was genuine. But really, I was hoping to get my hands on silver acupuncture needles. Wang Juping and I agreed to visit Grandpa Fei in Gizi village in 3 days. She needed time to gather money. Ginseng was extremely expensive, and people who had it rarely wanted to sell. She told only her husband about the plan, keeping it secret from her big-mouthed daughter-in-law. Back at the courtyard, I found Z practicing his stone throwing in the yard. His aim was getting much better. He could already hit a wooden post 10 meters away consistently. But accuracy alone wasn't enough. He needed power. I brought him inside and taught him a basic breathing and energy technique, something from my ancient martial arts training. I told him to practice every morning and evening. He was thrilled, connecting the dots to how I'd killed the fish and rabbits with stones. I promised him that with enough practice, he could take down even a wild boar with a single throw. But I made him swear to keep it secret from everyone. We practiced together, then headed to the cattle shed with stewed rabbit meat and medicine. On the way in, old Zhang spotted us entering my parents' shed. He must have figured out the connection, same surname, similar faces. But when I listened at the door afterward, I heard him quietly go to his own room. My father assured me old Zhang was a good man. He'd keep our secret. My father worried about me coming too often, afraid someone would report us. I reassured him that our courtyard was close by, and nobody from the village came this direction. I gave my mother her medicine and some fruit candy Z had insisted she have for chasing away the bitter taste. She tried to refuse, wanting to save them for Z. He declared he didn't like candy because he was a boy. We all laughed. Then I went next door to check old Cheese Leg. The herbal paste had worked beautifully. The swelling was way down, and the pain had eased significantly. It was time to set the bone. I warned him it would hurt badly. He grinned and said that during the war, his commander had dug a bullet out of his shoulder with a knife, and he hadn't made a sound. True to his word, he only let out 2 quiet grunts during the whole procedure, even as cold sweat covered his forehead. Afterward, I wrapped his leg with a special bone-mending bandage I'd bought from the system shop. It looked like ordinary white gauze with black medicine paste. Nothing suspicious. Old Amo asked what the black stuff was. I wrapped Old Chi's leg with a bone-mending bandage and told him it was my secret family recipe. The two old men didn't ask further questions. I splinted the leg with carved wooden boards to keep it stable. It looked simple enough that nobody would be suspicious. Old Chi said he felt great, though I knew he was being tough. I warned him to be extremely careful and avoid any second injury. He agreed, but I could sense his worry. The committee officials hadn't visited in days, and their next inspection could undo everything. Over the next few days, the nutrition liquid I'd been secretly adding to my parents' food was clearly working. My father had almost stopped coughing and looked healthy again. My mother was still weak, but improving steadily. She could eat and sleep normally now. That evening, after Z and I both bathed, which used up nearly all our firewood, he surprised me. He'd noticed that in the village, only men carried water. He wanted to start hauling water for our household, but the buckets were too big for him. I squeezed his little cheeks and told him he was a wonderful man of the house, but he needed to grow a bit taller first. He went quiet, not agreeing, not disagreeing, and sat down to practice his breathing exercises with extra determination. The next morning at work, Fong Fong was still sick and Lu Xiangqian was absent. The young team leader, Li Xingli, had reassigned my pig grass job to Zhao Xiaomei. His face was red, and he kept sneaking shy glances at her. She'd already gotten him wrapped around her finger in just a few days. Everyone noticed. Auntie Qian, the carpenter's wife, spoke up for me, pointing out that Lu Xiangqian had specifically assigned me that job. Li Xingli snapped at her rudely. That triggered another village woman, Niu Guilon, who openly mocked him for chasing after a city girl who'd never want him. She challenged him to ask Zhao Xiaomei right there whether she wanted to date him. He agreed to the dare. Niu Guilon turned to Zhao Xiaomei and asked point-blank. Zhao Xiaomei denied everything immediately. She'd never date a village farmer. Then she tried to drag me into it, sneering that if getting assigned pig grass duty meant dating the team leader, then I must be dating him too. When Zhao Xiaomei tried to drag me into her mess, I played dumb. I looked around innocently and asked, "Who's Li Xingli?" Then I pretended to suddenly recognize him. "Oh, is he the one who just slipped a boiled egg into your pocket?" The whole crowd burst out laughing. Li Xingli's face turned bright red, and Zhao Xiaomei was shaking with rage. The scene only ended when Li Xingli's father, the village accountant, rushed over and shut everything down. My pig grass assignment was restored without argument. The best part? Zhao Xiaomei's usual trick of acting fragile and batting her eyes to get men to do her work completely failed in this village. Most of the young men were off repairing my house, and the ones left in the fields had their wives watching. Nobody dared even glance at her. She only earned 2 work points all day. Meanwhile, I earned 4 points by noon and spent the afternoon weaving bamboo lids and baskets at home. 3 days later, it was time to visit Gizi village with Wang Juping. Fong Fong was feeling better and insisted on coming. Wang Juping hired old Zhang's ox cart so Fong Fong wouldn't have to walk. In the village, a nosy woman spotted me and immediately started asking if I had a boyfriend. Wang Juping shooed her away and warned me quietly that the woman's son was a troublemaker. Stay far away from that family. We arrived at a proper brick house, the nicest I'd seen outside the village office. A young woman let us in and led us to the back courtyard where an old man sat drinking tea. He quickly hid a worn book he'd been reading. This was Grandpa Fei. Wang Juping showed him the prescription I'd written for Fong Fong. He read it casually at first, then put on his glasses and read it again very carefully, muttering to himself, "Brilliant. Truly brilliant." Wang Juping impatiently asked if he had all the herbs. Instead of answering, he demanded to know where the prescription came from. Wang Juping looked at me, I nodded, and she told him it was mine. Grandpa Fei peered at me over his glasses, clearly surprised that a young girl had written such a sophisticated formula. "You wrote this?" he asked. I smiled and confirmed it was tailored specifically for Fong Fong's condition. Grandpa Fei didn't believe a young girl could write such a prescription, so he started testing me with medical questions. I answered every one. Gradually, his quizzing turned into a real discussion between equals. Eventually, he was asking me for my opinions on weaknesses in certain formulas. We talked for over an hour until I had to ask for water. When Wang Juping finally got to ask about buying herbs, Fei said he had everything on the list except ginseng. He'd traded his last piece 2 months ago to save someone's life. Ginseng was nearly impossible to find around here. Wang Juping looked crushed. I promised her I'd keep my eyes open in the mountains. Then I quietly asked Grandpa Fei the question I'd really come for. Did he have any spare silver acupuncture needles I could buy or borrow? His face lit up. He hurried inside and came back with a blue cloth bundle containing 19 gleaming silver needles, his master's old set. He offered them to me as a gift, saying they'd been gathering dust for years and deserved to be used by someone with real skill. I tried to pay him 50 yuan, but he firmly refused. He said the prescription I'd written and our medical discussion were worth far more than money. I accepted gratefully, already planning how to use these needles for a special lung-clearing technique that could cure my mother completely. On the ride home, Wang Juping was still upset about the ginseng. I told her my luck was usually good. Maybe I'd find some on the mountain. Then the ox cart suddenly stopped. 2 rough-looking young men had blocked the road. One of them spotted me and his eyes went wide. He stared openly, practically drooling. This was clearly the son of that nosy woman from earlier. Wang Juping shielded me with her body and warned him sharply that a man in a nearby village had recently been executed for assaulting a female volunteer. The young man backed off with his hands up, claiming he was just curious. But as the cart pulled away, he followed behind us, his eyes locked on me with an expression that made my skin crawl. On the way home, Wang Juping worried about the young thug who'd been staring at me. I told her not to worry. Gizi village was far from ours, and he couldn't reach me with the whole village watching. She calmed down eventually. When we arrived back at the village office, Lu Xiangqian was rushing out. He told me that 4 men from the Revolutionary Committee had come to the cattle shed. He was heading there to stop them from going too far. Everyone inside was old, sick, or injured. My heart dropped. I said a quick goodbye and hurried home. I changed into dark clothes, stuffed a headscarf in my bag, and slipped out the back way through the forest behind Sunny Slope. I climbed a tall tree where I could see into the cattle shed yard. What I saw made my blood boil. My father was shielding my mother, his back covered in whip marks, clothes torn, blood seeping through. Lu Xiangqian was offering the men cigarettes and pleading with them to stop, but one of them shoved him aside and lashed my father 2 more times. Others were screaming at old Qi and old Mo, who sat helpless on the ground covered in wounds, even spitting on them. After about 8 minutes, they finally got bored and left. I climbed down and followed them. When they reached the steepest part of the slope, I threw 4 stones simultaneously, hitting all 4 men in the backs of their knees, and 2 of them in their wrists too. Their legs buckled, and they tumbled down the steep hillside, screaming the whole way. My stones had already cracked their bones before the fall. They'd be bedridden for at least 6 months. What I didn't know was that someone had watched the whole thing, a tall man in a military uniform, hiding behind a tree. He'd come to see his grandfather, old Qi, and had witnessed the abuse. He'd been about to attack them himself when I beat him to it. He couldn't figure out how a girl could throw stones with such impossible precision. I rushed to gather medicinal herbs, ground them into paste, and cut bandage strips. I didn't tell Z what happened, no point worrying him. After a quick lunch, I packed up the medicine, leftover pancakes, and headed to the cattle shed. Nobody was around. Lu Xiangqian had probably taken the injured officials to a hospital. Inside the shed, my mother was crying over my father's wounds, trying to clean them with water. When she heard the door, she panicked and tried to cover his injuries with a blanket, not wanting me to see. I went straight to my parents' shed. They both tried to pretend the injuries weren't serious. Dad said he had tough skin. Mom said it would heal in a few days. But when I lifted the sheet from my father's back, I saw layers of old and new whip marks crisscrossing his skin. This wasn't the first time. I regretted holding back earlier. I should have broken more than just their legs. I applied my herbal paste to his wounds. The moment it touched his skin, he said the burning pain completely disappeared. He was amazed. I wrapped his back with cotton cloth, and within minutes his appetite returned. He and Mom happily shared the vegetable egg pancakes I'd brought, made with batter that Z had mixed himself. I told them I'd arranged for Z to start school at the commune's elementary school after summer break. Dad was pleased. No matter how hard life got, he said, learning should never stop. Then I took the remaining medicine and food next door. But when I knocked, the door was opened by a stranger. A young man in a military uniform with a sharp, cold expression. He looked confused to see me. Old Mo called from inside to let me in. The young man stepped aside and closed the door behind me. Old Chi introduced him as his grandson, Chi Monin. He'd clearly traveled a long way. There was a large military backpack in the corner. He'd been cleaning the old men's wounds when I arrived. Old Chi told his grandson that I was the one who'd saved his leg. Chi Monin thanked me quietly. I told him there was no need. Our families were helping each other through hard times. I got right to work applying medicine to both old men's wounds. They tried to protest since they weren't wearing shirts, but I didn't give them the chance. Their injuries were just as bad as my father's. Old Mo yelped with surprise when the paste took away his pain instantly. Old Chi scolded him for asking questions about my secret recipe. The two old men started bickering playfully, a good sign that they were feeling better. I noticed Chi Monin watching me carefully, studying me. I could tell he was trying to figure out what kind of person I was. I handed him a roll of cotton bandage strips and asked if he knew how to wrap wounds. He said yes, he was a soldier after all. I left quickly, not stopping at my parents' shed either. I didn't want Lu Xiangqian to come back and find me there. For now, my connection to the cattle shed had to stay secret. After I was gone, the two old men felt alive again. Their pain had faded to almost nothing, and their stomachs were growling. Old Chi immediately ordered his grandson to open the lunchbox and see what I'd brought. After I left the cattle shed, Old Chi shared the egg pancakes with Old Mo and gave one to his grandson Chi Monin. Even though Old Chi was clearly happy to see him, he forced Chi Monin to leave, harshly ordering him out of the cattle shed. He did it out of love. Chi Monin was already a battalion commander in the military, and being connected to a disgraced grandfather could destroy his career. Old Chi had even threatened to take his own life if his grandson didn't stay away. Back at my courtyard, the workers told me they were ready to build the heated sleeping platforms. I asked them to build them in all 4 rooms, not just 2. They thought I was crazy, just 2 people in 4 rooms? I told them I might need the space later, then handed out premium cigarettes to keep everyone happy. I watched how they built the platforms and quickly understood the principles. I suggested some improvements based on what I knew, and they were happy to follow my ideas. The house was nearly done: roof, walls, doors, windows, kitchen, and even the well, all finished. I just needed furniture and a proper cooking pot. I plan to go to town tomorrow to buy everything. I also wrote a letter to Yang Lifan. I'd been so busy, I hadn't written since arriving. I traded a bag of white flour with villagers for dried mushrooms, 2 dried chickens, and wild nuts to send as a care package along with the letter. That afternoon, I boiled the silver needles to sterilize them and wove sleeping mats from bamboo. Z tried to learn but couldn't manage it. His fingers got blistered and cut. He stomped off to practice, throwing stones instead. I comforted him, saying nobody could be good at everything, and he was already more capable than any kid for miles around. That cheered him right up. I also wove 2 bamboo storage boxes to give my parents for keeping clothes and supplies. That evening, I performed acupuncture on my mother for the first time. My father and Z watched. Dad looked stunned. Z looked worshipful. The results were immediate. Before the needles, Mom said her chest felt like a boulder was sitting on it. Afterward, she said the weight was gone. She could breathe freely for the first time since getting sick. I told her she'd need 2 more sessions to complete the first round of treatment. She asked where I'd learned medicine. I told them I'd secretly apprenticed with a skilled old doctor who didn't want anyone to know. They assumed I'd been talented enough to catch a master's eye. That explanation satisfied them. When I went next door to check on Old Chi and Old Mo, Chi Monin was already gone, his backpack and everything. His grandfather had clearly made him leave. On our way back from the cattle shed, a dark figure stepped out of the trees and startled me. I grabbed a stone, ready to throw, but it was Chi-Monin. He handed me 2 wild chickens, a fat rabbit, and a box of wild eggs he'd hunted in the mountains. He asked if I could cook them for his grandfather tomorrow. I agreed. It was right for a grandson to take care of his grandfather. I noticed he was still carrying his full backpack. Old Chi had told us Monin had gone back to the military, but clearly he hadn't left at all. He had 15 days of leave and planned to stay nearby for at least 10, sleeping in the forest. I couldn't let him do that. The nights here dropped to just a few degrees, and he couldn't even build a fire without attracting attention. So I offered him a room at my courtyard. It didn't have a proper bed yet, but it had walls, a door, and a roof. He accepted gratefully. Back home, I cooked him a quick bowl of noodles with eggs and scallions while Z boiled water to help clean the wild chickens. Monin washed his own dishes afterward and skinned the rabbit without being asked. He was clearly used to this kind of work. We finished around 10:30. I set him up in one of the side rooms with straw and a bamboo mat for a bed, and brought him a spare quilt. I told him he had to clear the room before 6 every morning since workers would be coming to finish the sleeping platforms, and he shouldn't let anyone see him. He thanked me sincerely. I got the feeling he was surprised by how willing I was to help. Meanwhile, at Lu Xiangqian's house, he'd finally returned from the hospital where he'd taken the 4 committee officials. All 4 had broken legs, every single one fractured in the exact same spot behind the knee. 2 also had broken arms, and 1 had cracked his head open. They accused someone of attacking them, but couldn't explain how or who. Lu Xiangqian told his wife the whole thing was strange. 4 people breaking bones in the identical spot seemed almost supernatural. Wang Juping had no sympathy whatsoever. She said it was karma catching up with them for all the evil they'd done. At 6 in the morning, Z and I got up to make hand-cut noodles for breakfast. We had the day off and planned to go shopping in town. Then I remembered we had a guest. I sent Z to check on Chi-Monin, but he was already gone. His bedding was neatly stacked outside our door, and his backpack had vanished. He'd slipped away before anyone could see him. Smart guy. But not smart enough, apparently. Minutes later, a village worker named Lu Sigue showed up at our gate, cheerfully announcing that he'd found a relative of ours at the village entrance. He'd brought Chi-Monin right to our door. Z and I stared in disbelief. Monin quickly explained that he wasn't actually family, just a former neighbor whose family was close to ours. He said he'd heard we were here and came to visit from the military. Lu Sigue bought it, but then gave us a knowing look. Neighbors? Grew up together? In his mind, this was obviously a romance. Before I could correct anything, Lu Sigue was already pointing out that the house had plenty of rooms, and the heated beds would be ready today. Monin helpfully agreed that sleeping on the floor was fine. He'd basically invited himself to stay, and there was nothing I could do about it. Lu Sigue rushed off, not home, but to spread the news across the entire village that my childhood sweetheart had come to find me. I was speechless. But honestly, having Monin around wasn't so bad. He could hunt and carry things. I told him Z and I were going to town to buy supplies. He asked to come along, saying he had his own money, years of military salary saved up. Fine by me. More hands meant more help carrying things. We ate breakfast together, hand-cut noodles with wild eggs and sesame oil, and headed for the village entrance. Z and I took the ox cart while Monin walked, saying the cart was too slow for him. The only other passengers were 2 village women known throughout the area as nosy gossips. I sat as far from them as possible. On the ox cart, 2 notorious village gossips immediately started pestering me. Auntie Tsuelian tried to set me up with her son, grabbing my hand and practically planning a wedding on the spot. I cut her off firmly, telling her I had no interest in dating anyone and warning her not to spread rumors about me. Then Zhao Xiaomei climbed aboard with another female volunteer. She looked disgusted to see me but had no choice. It was the only cart to town. The 2 gossipy aunties turned their attention to her instead, making snide comments about her not working and getting men to do her jobs. Zhao Xiaomei exploded on them, threatening to report them to the commune leadership for disrupting collective unity. I had to give her credit. She was an expert at scaring people with political threats. The Andes shut up immediately. Even Auntie Tsuelian, who had been sizing up Zhao Xiaomei as a potential daughter-in-law, decided she was far too dangerous. She imagined Zhao Xiaomei poisoning her whole family over a disagreement. After that outburst, the rest of the ride was peaceful. At the town, old Zhang told me specifically where to find him when I was done shopping. He only said it to me, ignoring everyone else. Zhao Xiaomei muttered something nasty about him under her breath. I mailed Yang Lifin's care package at the post office and ran into Qi Monin outside. He'd been making a phone call. He offered to lead us to the supply store since he knew the way. When he walked into the store, tall, handsome, in his officer's uniform, every pair of eyes followed him, especially the unmarried girls. They couldn't stop staring. With Qi Monin drawing everyone's attention in the supply store, Z and I slipped in unnoticed. Z whispered, "Why is everyone staring at Brother Nan?" I told him it was because he was good-looking. Then Zhao Xiaomei walked right up to Monin and asked for his help. When he refused coldly, she pulled her usual trick, moral blackmail. "Aren't soldiers supposed to serve the people unconditionally?" she demanded. Monin shut her down perfectly. He listed a soldier's real duties, following orders, going to battle, dying for the country, then calmly asked what exactly she needed him to do. She couldn't bring herself to say she just wanted help measuring fabric. He walked away without another glance. Everyone in the store quickly learned not to mess with him. I enjoyed the show, then got to shopping. The salesgirl at the kitchen counter was rude, typical for this era, but I didn't let it bother me. I bought a big iron wok, 2 smaller pots, spatulas, ladles, and all the kitchen supplies I'd been missing. Then I headed to the grain counter, where I found Monin buying 30 pounds of flour, nearly all his ration tickets. He said it was to eat. I understood immediately he didn't want to freeload at my place, and he was also stocking up for his grandfather. Meanwhile, Zhao Xiaomei sneered about me approaching Monin. Next to her, another female volunteer named Li Lin was staring at him with desperate hope. She'd been in the village for 2 years, her spirit nearly broken. She was considering marrying a local farmer just to survive. A military officer felt like her only chance to escape. Monin asked me to help him figure out what his grandfather and old Mo needed for winter: warm quilts, winter clothes, cotton shoes, gloves, hats. Then he handed me all his remaining money and ration tickets, keeping only enough for his return trip. He asked me to handle the shopping since he didn't know what to buy. I would have taken care of the 2 old men anyway, but having extra funds certainly helped. I tucked everything into my bag and led him toward the fabric counter. I went into the back warehouse with a friendly saleswoman named Jiang Yuanyuan to look at fabric. I bought 2 bundles of cheap rough cloth, perfect for making things for the cattle shed without drawing attention, and 25 feet of dark cotton fabric for winter clothes. Yuanyuan tried to set me up with her brother, but I deflected politely. When I walked back out, I immediately sensed something wrong. Li Lin, the quiet female volunteer who'd been staring at Monin all morning, was walking toward him with a strange expression. Her fingers were pulling at her shirt buttons. She'd already undone the first one. I understood instantly. She was going to throw herself at him, with her clothes open. In this era, if a woman's body was exposed against a man in public, he'd be forced to marry her regardless of what actually happened. His military career would be over if he refused. She opened the second button and lunged. I dropped everything and tackled her, wrapping my arms around her to cover her exposed chest before she could reach Monin. I shouted at him not to turn around and to leave immediately. He trusted me without question and walked straight out. Li Lin screamed after him, begging him not to go. I pushed her away. A woman who'd watched the whole thing confirmed to everyone that Li Lin had deliberately torn open her own clothes and tried to throw herself onto the officer. Li Lin collapsed on the floor crying, screaming at me for ruining her only chance to survive. Some bystander felt sorry for her and said she must be desperate. I shut that down fast. If you feel so bad for her, let your son marry her. The woman's sympathy evaporated instantly. Jiang Yuanyuan came out and declared loudly that she'd witnessed everything clearly. If Li Lin tried to frame the soldier, Yuan would testify at the police station. Even Zhao Xiaomei looked shocked. She'd always thought Li Lin was a quiet, harmless person. She admitted to herself that even she wouldn't have dared try something this brazen. I was still fuming from the Li Lin incident when I went back to buy a kitchen knife. The rude salesgirl didn't dare give me attitude this time. I picked a sturdy cleaver, paid, and left without a word. I had too much stuff to carry, so I made several trips to pile everything outside the supply store while Z guarded it. Then I fetched old Zhang with the ox cart. Zhao Xiaomei and Li Lin climbed onto the cart too. Old Zhang kindly warned me I was buying too much flour, suggesting I mix in cheaper cornmeal. I appreciated his concern. He genuinely cared about me like a grandfather would. Then Zhao Xiaomei couldn't resist. She sneered that I was a big city princess, and spending money on flour was nothing to someone like me. Something snapped in me. I grabbed her hair and slapped her hard across the face, twice. I told her I was done tolerating her constant provocations. Then I leaned close and whispered that if she ever tried to pin the capitalist label on me again, I had 100 ways to make her life miserable. She screamed about reporting me to the police. I told her to go ahead. We could let the officers decide whether calling someone a capitalist's daughter, knowing full well what happens to people with that label, counts as attempted murder. She sat back down, shaking with rage, but unable to do anything. Li Lin stayed quiet in her corner, but I caught a dark gleam in her eyes when she glanced at me. I felt like two snakes were watching me, but I didn't care. I'm not the type to stay quiet just to keep the peace. Monin had watched the whole scene from across the street. I wondered what he thought of me. The girl who treated wounds gently, spoke softly to her brother, but also slapped bullies and crippled abusers with thrown stones. Back at the courtyard, I found that Monin had already filled both water jars, split all the bamboo, and fixed the new wok into the stove. The guy never stopped working. I appreciated that. 2 of the 4 heated platforms were finished. The workers would complete the rest by tomorrow morning, which meant I needed to deliver on my promise to treat everyone to a feast. I planned to hunt in the mountains that afternoon for meat and trade with villagers for vegetables. For lunch, I cooked both wild chickens and made spicy diced rabbit with the new seasonings I'd bought, wrapped in fresh flour pancakes with cold shredded potato on the side. Everything tasted incredible. Real ingredients from this era had so much more flavor than what I'd known in my previous life. I packed 2 full lunch boxes of food and a bag of pancakes for the cattle shed, enough for all 4 people there. Over lunch, Chi Monin asked what had happened at the supply store. I told him bluntly. A girl had taken a liking to him and tried to force herself on him by ripping open her own clothes. He looked disgusted and said he'd have reported her to the police. A female creep is still a creep, he said. I asked what he'd do if the situation had gone further, if Li Lin threatened to kill herself over lost honor and the military ordered him to marry her to avoid a scandal. He said he'd refuse even if they kicked him out of the army. That made me feel even angrier at Li Lin. She was willing to destroy someone else's life just to escape her own problems. Looking at Monin's eye-catching uniform and handsome face, I decided to give him some survival advice. I pulled Z over to listen to. He'd need this knowledge someday. Rule 1. Never accept drinks you haven't poured yourself. Rule 2. Stay far away from rivers, ponds, and any water a woman could jump in, force you to rescue her, then claim you owe her. Rule 3. Don't let sympathy lead you into traps. A crying woman might be a spider waiting to catch you. Rule 4. Don't assume village elders are harmless. Some are wolves hunting on behalf of their granddaughters. He laughed at the spider comment, but I was dead serious. When I explained the river scenario in detail, his smile disappeared. He understood. We brought food to the cattle shed. Old Zhang tactfully disappeared into his own room the moment he saw us coming. At the shed, Monin greeted my parents politely before going next door. Within seconds, I heard old Chi's furious whisper. He was trying to chase his grandson away again. But somehow Monin calmed him down. My father, hearing that Monin was staying at my house, was not happy at all. A young man and woman under the same roof. This is not appropriate. I reminded him Z was there too, and that leaving Monin in the forest wasn't an option. Then I told him about the supply store incident. Both my parents were shocked. They'd never encountered anything like that in their academic lives. After that, Dad couldn't really argue, though he spent a long time lecturing me about keeping proper distance from men and not falling for sweet talk. He stopped just short of calling all men untrustworthy. I headed into the mountain alone to find meat for tomorrow's feast. Deep in the forest, I stumbled upon a huge patch of hazel mushrooms, fat, beautiful ones growing in thick clusters. The system offered 80 star coins for one, though it only accepted a single specimen per type. I collected the rest by hand, over 30 pounds total, stuffing bags full. Whatever we didn't use tomorrow could be dried for winter. I also bagged 2 fat rabbits with my stones and gathered more wild vegetables. This mountain was incredibly rich with resources. No wonder nobody in this area had starved even during the worst famine years. Then I heard snorting. 2 wild boars stepped out from behind a tree, one around 200 pounds, the other at least 300, with long curved tusks. My eyes lit up. That was tomorrow's feast right there, plus enough leftover to make preserved meat. The smaller one charged first. I hurled a heavy stone straight at its skull. Its head cracked open, and it collapsed within steps. The bigger one charged next, same result. With my aim and the bit of internal energy I'd rebuilt, killing wild boars was simple work. But then I had a problem. How was I supposed to drag 2 massive boars home? Right on cue, Monin appeared. He'd gone hunting too, and had 2 wild pheasants in his basket. He saw the blood, ran over worried, then froze when he noticed the 2 dead boars at my feet, both killed with single blows to the head. I cheerfully told him his timing was perfect. He could drag the big one. I'd take the smaller one. As we hauled them downhill, I was happily planning what to make: cured meat, jerky, meat sauce. Then Monin asked quietly whether hunters in this village were actually allowed to keep large game like wild boars for themselves. That question hit me like cold water. He was right. 2 wild rabbits or a few pheasants were one thing. But hundreds of pounds of pork? That would obviously have to be shared with the whole village. My fantasies shattered completely when we met children gathering firewood at the edge of the forest. They spotted the boars and started jumping around excitedly, shouting, "We're getting meat. The whole village is getting pork. So much for my cured meat plans." Monin found my disappointed face amusing. The whole village showed up, thrilled about the wild boars. According to local custom, small game like rabbits and pheasants could be kept by the hunter, but large animals like wild boars had to be shared with everyone. Lu Xiangqian assumed Monin had killed both boars. Nobody would believe a delicate girl like me could do it. I happily played along. He gave us 20 pounds of meat as the hunter's share, double the usual amount since there were 2 boars. I pushed my luck a little further, asking if I could buy extra meat for tomorrow's feast. He hesitated. There were a lot of families to feed. So I offered to buy whatever was left over, even just bones for soup. Bones he didn't mind parting with, so he agreed immediately. Monin was pulled away to help butcher the pigs. Before he left, I reminded him about my safety rules. He laughed and handed me his basket with 2 wild pheasants inside. When I got home, Z was upset that I'd gone into the mountain without him again. I promised to take him next time. He forgave me quickly when I told him we'd be eating braised pork for dinner. I spent the rest of the afternoon trading white sugar and dried noodles with villagers for cabbages, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, winter supplies for the cellar under our courtyard. The villagers were happy to trade since they had plenty of vegetables, but rarely got sugar or fine noodles. At the village office, Monin was chopping meat with military precision, every piece exactly the same size. Girls kept hovering around him, but he didn't even glance up. Lu Xiangqian was clearly impressed. I sent Z with 10 yuan to buy bones, and whatever else was available. Meanwhile, I finally counted the money Monin had given me earlier. I was stunned. Over 3,000 yuan, mostly crisp new bills. Plus a stack of ration tickets and, best of all, a bicycle ticket. Those were incredibly rare and worth a couple hundred yuan on the black market alone. If Monin agreed, I could buy a bicycle. That would change everything. No more depending on the slow ox cart every time I needed to go to town. The whole village buzzed with excitement over the wild boar meat. Everyone lined up at the village office. Lu Xiangqian gave us 20 pounds as the hunter's share, double the usual amount since there were 2 boars. I asked to buy extra, but the meat was all spoken for. He let me have about 20 pounds of bones for just 10 cents though. Bones make excellent soup, so I was happy. The volunteers got 4 pounds total for their dormitory, 2 for the men, 2 for the women. Zhao Xiaomei complained it wasn't enough, and a village woman immediately shut her down. Li Wan, the women's team leader, smoothed things over diplomatically. When Li Lin tried to apologize to Monin during the meat distribution, he looked at her blankly and said, "Do I know you?" He genuinely didn't remember her. Zhao Xiaomei burst out laughing. Li Lin turned bright red and was dragged away by Li Wan, who was furious that another female volunteer was making them all look bad. Monin followed my advice perfectly, refusing dinner invitations, avoiding eye contact with women, and pretending not to see an old lady who fell down nearby. He wasn't taking any chances. When Zhao Xiaomei found out Monin was a battalion commander, her eyes practically sparkled. She announced she was going to help her old friend Song Yin clean up and ran toward my courtyard. Z handled it perfectly. He locked the gate and told her she needed my permission to enter. I told him not to bother opening it. She banged on the gate for a while, but when no one answered and the smell of my braised pork started drifting over the wall, she finally gave up and ran back to the dormitory. She arrived to find that every last scrap of meat had already been eaten. Not even a drop of sauce remained. She nearly flipped the table. "You ate all my meat? I don't care what it takes. I must eat meat today." Meanwhile, our dinner was wonderful. I made my specialty braised pork, a dish I'd perfected in my previous life because my master loved it. Monin and Z ate in complete silence, bowl after bowl, scraping up every bit of sauce. I packed portions for my parents, the 2 old men and old Zhang, then sat outside watching Z practice throwing stones while Monin cleaned up. A peaceful evening. Back at the dormitory, Zhao Xiaomei threw a fit about missing the meat. Li Wan, the team leader, had finally had enough. She pointed out that Zhao Xiaomei had skipped her cooking duty to chase after Monin, so nobody was obligated to save her share. Starting tomorrow, Zhao Xiaomei and Li Lin would have to cook for themselves separately. Li Lin quietly announced she wanted to move out of the dormitory entirely. Everyone immediately guessed she meant my courtyard. Zhao Xiaomei laughed at her. She tried to get through my gate herself and failed. But Li Lin's eyes showed stubborn determination. She saw it as her last chance. I didn't know people were already scheming to get into my house. I was at the cattle shed with Z and Monin, delivering braised pork and treating my mother. After acupuncture, Mom could walk around the shed without getting breathless for the first time. She praised my medical skills, and I thought of my master from my previous life, the stubborn old man who'd trained me. I wondered how he'd taken the news of my death in that lab explosion. Next door, Monin was bandaging his grandfather, an old Amo. Old Chi grumbled about wasting cotton cloth, but Monin quietly said nothing spent on them was wasted. Then old Amo tried some matchmaking. He mentioned his 19-year-old granddaughter who'd joined a performing troupe, beautiful, talented. Before he could finish, old Chi cut him off bluntly. He said old Mo's daughter-in-law was too status-obsessed to ever approve a match with the grandson of a disgraced man. It was harsh but true, and old Amo couldn't argue. Then something switched on in old Chi's brain. His eyes brightened, and he leaned toward Monin. "What do you think of Xiaoyun?" Monin's hands paused on the bandage. "Think of her how?" Old Chi smacked him. "Are you dense? A girl that beautiful and capable, and you feel nothing? Are you even a man? Is something wrong with you?" He actually glanced at a certain area of Monin's body. Monin was speechless. This was his own grandfather questioning his manhood. Before old Chi could push further, I knocked on the door. Monin jumped up to open it, yanking the bandage not tight in his rush. Old Chi hissed in pain. The kid couldn't even be gentle with his own grandfather. When I walked into old Chi and old Mo's shed, they were looking at me strangely. Monin quickly said they'd just been talking about my feast tomorrow. I didn't think much of it. I checked old Chi's leg, and decided it was time to try walking. I helped him stand and take a few steps. He was ecstatic, no pain at all. I removed the splint and bandage, and he practically danced around the tiny room, jumping up and down like an excited child until Monin forced him back onto the bed. Old Chi got serious for a moment. He said my medical skills could save wounded soldiers from being forced into early retirement. I understood what he was hinting at. He wanted me to serve a bigger purpose. But I told him the truth. As long as my parents were here, I wasn't leaving. He went quiet. Even he couldn't ask me to abandon them. Without me, my mother would probably already be dead, and he'd still be crippled. On the walk home under the stars, Monin asked if I'd really stay as long as my parents were here. I said yes. I knew it would only be about 3 more years until they'd be cleared and allowed to return to the city, but I didn't share that with him. I could tell he understood my choice. He'd wanted to do the same for his grandfather, but had been forced to stay in the military under threat of Old Chi taking his own life. As we approached the courtyard, we spotted a shadowy figure circling the walls, looking for a way to climb over. I pulled Z around to the back entrance. Monin grabbed a sturdy piece of firewood and waited silently inside the wall. A pair of hands appeared on top of the wall, then a head. The man dropped into the yard and rubbed his hands together, grinning. "Little beauty, your man's here to take care of you." Monin's eyes turned ice cold. He swung the wood into the intruder's back, knocking him face first into the dirt. Then the blows rained down, fast and precise. The man screamed, begged, and finally went silent. I walked over and nudged him with my foot. "Did you kill him?" "He fainted," Monin said, tossing the stick aside. "I know how to hit without killing." I shone my flashlight on the unconscious intruder. It was the creepy young man from Gizi village, Tian Liang, the one who'd stared at me on the road. He'd actually tracked me down and climbed my wall in the middle of the night. Monin tied him up with a special military not only he could undo, and told me to go to sleep. He'd handle it in the morning. I went to the kitchen to prepare dough for tomorrow's feast, 3 big batches of steamed buns for over 30 guests. I also soaked dried noodles and planned the menu. Then I practiced my breathing exercises and slept. Before dawn, I was up cooking. Monin got dressed in his crisp uniform, grabbed Tian Liang, and headed to Lu Xiangqian's house first. When Lu Xiangqian and Wang Juping heard what happened, they were furious, especially Wang Juping, who blamed herself for bringing me to Gizi village in the first place. Monin carried Tian Liang to the police station on foot while Lu Xiangqian rode ahead on his bicycle to file the report. Climbing a woman's wall at night was a serious crime. Even without worse consequences, it meant prison or a labor camp. News spread through the village fast. Most people were glad someone had finally caught Tian Liang. He'd been terrorizing women across several villages for years, protected by an uncle at the county police station. Few people blamed me for being too pretty and attracting trouble, but they were quickly shouted down by the majority, who pointed out I was hardworking, modest, and kind to everyone. Wang Juping and Fong Fong came over early to help me cook. They admired how the courtyard had been transformed, clean, well-organized, every room bright and new. Wang Juping tasted a fresh steamed bun and praised it as the best 3-grain bun she'd ever had. Just as I was about to share my dough-making secrets, Z ran in looking annoyed. That shameless Li Lin showed up at our gate with her luggage. I walked out of the kitchen with my face set hard. Li Lin had already made her way into the backyard with her luggage. The moment she saw me, she dropped to her knees.
"Please let me stay."
The dormitory kicked me out. I have nowhere to go. I didn't move to help her up. Her knees, her problem. I told her I didn't believe she'd been kicked out, and even if she had, it wasn't my concern. This wasn't a place she could just move into. I told her to leave before I got ugly about it. She wouldn't budge. She started with the "women should help women" speech. That's when Wang Juping exploded. She tore into Li Lin with everything she had, calling out her real motive, which everyone already knew. She wanted to get close to Monin. Wang Juping kept calling him my boyfriend and my man, which was embarrassing but useful. Correcting her in front of Li Lin would only make things worse, so I kept quiet. Li Lin tried a different angle. She told me I was pretty and rich and could find anyone, but without Monin, she would die. I cut her off. You dying has nothing to do with me. Just don't do it in my house. She declared she'd kneel there until I agreed. I said, suit yourself, and went back to cooking. Wang Juping gave up arguing too. She could see Li Lin had made up her mind. No amount of shame would move her. So, we focused on the feast instead. I needed to borrow tables, chairs, and dishes from neighbors for 3 full tables of guests. Wang Juping volunteered to handle all the borrowing and returning. Since she couldn't read, I drew little pictures next to each item on my list. She loved that. Fong Fong stayed to help me steam buns, while Z managed the outdoor stoves. I set big pots of bone soup to simmer. The meatless bones from yesterday's share needed hours of cooking to make a decent broth. Through all of this, I walked past Li Lin multiple times without a single glance. She was invisible to me. She knelt there in growing pain and growing hatred, silently promising herself that once she had Monin, she'd make me pay for today. By the time Wang Juping returned with borrowed tables and dishes, the kitchen was in full swing. Wild chicken stewed with mushrooms, pork with sauerkraut, and glass noodles. The smell was so good that even the workers building the heated platforms couldn't concentrate. Li Lin had been kneeling in the blazing sun for hours. Her knees were in agony and her face was burned red. She kept swallowing saliva from the meat smells drifting past her. When Monin walked into the yard, she perked up and put on her weakest, most pitiful look. He didn't even slow down, just glanced at her and went straight to the kitchen. Then she pulled out a folding knife and pressed it to her own throat. If I die here, she said, staring at Monin, what do you think will happen to your career? So she'd given up begging and moved to blackmail. Wang Juping went ballistic, demanding to know exactly how Li Lin was desperate. Nobody bullied her. Nobody starved her. She wasn't sick. She just didn't want to keep doing farm work. She wanted an easy life with a military officer. Li Lin ignored Wang Juping completely and kept the blade at her neck, threatening that if she died, we'd all be murderers. Monin looked at me. Somehow I understood immediately. He knew I could knock the knife away. But I didn't want my aim connected to this. Instead, I loudly told Z to knock the knife out of her hand. Z reached for a stone. I threw mine at the same instant, a cover. My stone hit the nerve in Li Lin's hand first, making her fingers go numb. The knife dropped. Z's stone hit a split second later. Wang Juping charged forward, kicked the knife away, grabbed Li Lin by the hair, and dragged her all the way to the dormitory, cursing the entire way. Every villager along the route got the full story. People were shocked. These city girls who always looked down on country folk turned out to have this kind of shamelessness in them. Someone ran to fetch Li Wan from the fields. She arrived sweating and out of breath, stunned to find a crowd gathered outside the dormitory. Wang Juping dragged Li Lin all the way to the dormitory by her hair, telling every person she passed exactly what had happened. Villagers gathered around in shock. Li Wan was called back from the fields. Wang Juping confronted Li Lin publicly, demanding she explain how exactly she was desperate and had no way to survive. Was anyone bullying her? Was she starving? Was she dying of some disease? Li Wan confirmed that nobody at the dormitory had mistreated Li Lin. Her bed was still there waiting for her. She'd chosen to leave on her own. Li Lin couldn't answer any of Wang Juping's questions because there was nothing to say. She had food, shelter, and no enemies. She was just tired of hard work and wanted an easy life with a military officer. Lu Xiangqian arrived and quickly grasped how serious the situation was. Someone threatening suicide to blackmail others was no small matter. He sent for rope and had 2 village women tie Li Lin's hands and feet to prevent further incidents. Then he delivered his verdict. Someone like her wasn't welcome in Qinghe village anymore. He was sending her to the commune office immediately. After that, her fate was out of his hands. Li Lin knew what that meant. She'd be sent to a labor farm where people worked until they dropped. That was what No Way Out really looked like. She tried to beg, but Lu Xiangqian wouldn't listen. She was a ticking bomb, and he wasn't keeping her around. When Zhao Xiaomei heard what happened, she quietly abandoned her own plans to worm her way into my courtyard. Auntie Tsuelian, who'd been scheming to get her daughter into my house too, also backed off fast. Meanwhile, I was finishing the feast. 4 dishes and a soup, wild chicken with mushrooms, pork with sauerkraut and glass noodles, 2 cold vegetable salads, and rich bone broth. Plenty for 3 full tables. Everyone who came praised the food, and Lu Xiangqian joked that I'd set the bar too high for every future village banquet. I ate in the backyard with Wang Juping, Fong Fong, and Zi while Monin and Lu Xiangqian hosted the guests out front. I asked Wang Juping about the ginseng search. Still nothing, but she'd asked relatives in the city to keep looking. Then Monin rushed over, face tense. Come quick, a child choked on a bone. Wang Juping dragged Li Lin by the hair all the way to the dormitory, announcing her crimes to everyone along the route. A crowd gathered fast. Li Wan was called back from the fields. Wang Juping publicly demanded that Li Lin explain exactly how she was desperate. Was anyone bullying her? Was she starving? Sick? Li Wan confirmed nobody at the dormitory had mistreated her. Her bed was still waiting. Li Lin couldn't answer a single question because there was truly nothing wrong. She had food, shelter, and no enemies. She simply didn't want to do farm work anymore. Lu Xiangqian arrived, assessed the situation quickly, and had Li Lin tied up to prevent further stunts. Then he told her she was no longer welcome in Qinghe village. He'd send her to the commune, and after that, her fate wasn't his problem. Li Lin knew what that meant. A labor farm where people worked until they collapsed. That was what No Way Out actually looked like. The fallout was useful. Zhao Xiaomei quietly dropped her own plans to get into my courtyard. Auntie Tsuelian, who'd been scheming to plant her daughter in my house to seduce Monin, also backed off completely. Meanwhile, I finished preparing the feast. Wild chicken with mushrooms, pork with sauerkraut and glass noodles, 2 cold vegetable salads, and bone broth. 3 full tables, 4 dishes and a soup, generous portions. Everyone praised the food. Lu Xiangqian joked I'd ruined future village banquets by setting the bar too high. I ate quietly in the back with Wang Juping, Fong Fong, and Zi. I asked about the ginseng search. Still nothing, but she had relatives looking in the city. Then Monin rushed over. A child was choking on a bone. I ran to the front yard. A woman was crying over a 3-year-old boy who couldn't breathe, his face turning red. I pulled the child from her, held his chest, and gave one precise tap on his back using a tiny bit of internal energy. A chicken bone popped out of his mouth. I told the mother to feed the boy soft food for a few days since his throat was probably scratched. Instead of thanking me, she accused me of being stingy and trying to stop her kid from eating meat. She hadn't even been invited. She tagged along, uninvited, with her husband. Wang Juping erupted, scolding the woman for her ingratitude and her habit of mooching food from neighbors all over the village. It turned out she'd been carrying their family's grain rations to her parents' house, leaving her own household short and forcing herself to beg meals everywhere. Her embarrassed husband finally yelled at her to leave. She reluctantly went, clutching her crying child and looking longingly at the meat still on the table. I smiled and told the husband it was fine, but privately decided never to hire him again. People who can't show basic gratitude aren't worth keeping around. Despite that sour moment, the feast ended well. The men, who normally never helped in the kitchen, voluntarily cleaned up, washed dishes, and even returned all the borrowed tables and chairs to their owners. After everyone left, we fired up all 4 newly built heated platforms to dry them out. In 2 days, they'd be ready to sleep on. Zi, Monin, and I spent the afternoon cleaning every room. Once the carpenter delivered the custom furniture, we'd finally have a proper home. The next morning, Monin volunteered to help with pig grass duty. With him, Zi, and Fong Fong all helping, we filled 4 baskets and an extra bundle in just 1 hour. I wanted to finish early so I could go mushroom picking in the mountain before the village organized its group foraging trip in a few days. Fong Fong told me that every year during harvest season, the village gives everyone time off to gather mountain goods, mushrooms, chestnuts, walnuts, pine nuts. Deeper in the forest, there were wild fruit trees too, but bears and boars liked those spots, so nobody went without armed escorts. I was lucky to have left the work area early because shortly after, Tian Liang's mother, that nosy woman Sun Dahong from Gizi village, showed up at the village square, wailing and throwing herself on the ground like she was performing in an opera. She dropped to her knees in front of Lu Xiangqian and begged him to help free her. Good boy. She insisted Tian Liang would never do anything wrong. It must have been my fault for seducing him to our village. She said since Monin had already beaten him badly, they should call it even. Her brother worked at the county police station and had told her that if she could get a forgiveness letter from our side and we dropped the charges, he could make the whole thing go away. Without it, Tian Liang was looking at least 3 years in a labor camp. Lu Xiangqian refused flatly. He said criminals should face consequences. If climbing a woman's wall at night could be forgiven just because someone's mother came crying, then laws meant nothing, and the world would descend into chaos. I didn't know about any of this drama. I was sitting under a tree with Fong, Zi, and Monin after finishing our work, sharing water. When Monin didn't have a canteen, I offered him mine, then remembered I'd already drunk from it and quickly gave him Zi's instead. Monin assured me that no matter what connections Tian Liang's family had, even his uncle at the county police station, the case wouldn't be dropped. He'd made sure of that. I thanked him sincerely. He joked that if I really wanted to show gratitude, I could send him homemade food after he returned to his unit. I agreed happily and offered to make meat sauce before he left. He mentioned he preferred beef sauce and would try to find some beef when he went to the county town for business in a few days. I didn't realize he was really looking for an excuse to keep writing letters to me. We went into the mountain with Fong and Zi to pick mushrooms. Fong knew all the best spots from years of foraging. The mushrooms grew so thick you could practically just scoop them off the ground. She told me dried mushrooms sold for 50 cents a pound at the supply store, and families could earn decent money during foraging season. Between mushrooms now and chestnuts and pine nuts in the fall, hardworking families could make quite a bit of extra income. While Fong and I filled our baskets, Zi spotted a rabbit and chased after it. Monin followed him. They didn't come back for a long time, so Fong and I went looking. Fong suddenly grabbed my arm and said we couldn't go any further. Ahead was a place called Wild Pear Slope, known for roaming packs of wild boars and bears. Several hunters had been attacked there over the years. 2 never came back. Even the armed village militia avoided the area. I recognized it as the spot where I'd killed those 2 boars a few days ago. I told Fong not to worry. With me around, no wild boar would hurt her. Secretly, I was hoping we'd run into some. More boars meant more meat for the village, and maybe I could even scan a live one for star coins. We pushed through thick brush and tangled vines. I cut a path with my system knife. After half an hour, we found Zi happily perched in a hawthorn tree, picking fruit with a big grin. Monin was up a wild pear tree nearby, his bag nearly full. I was about to call out to Zi when I heard that familiar snorting sound. I spotted a wild boar through the bushes. Its snorting was fading. It was moving away. I set down my basket and told Fong to wait with Zi while I went to check something out. What I really did was chase after the boar. I caught up with it, scanned it with my system, and earned 500 star coins. It vanished instantly. Monin had followed me from the pear tree. When he caught up, he saw wild boar tracks alongside my footprints and asked if I'd been chasing it. I told him it got away. He accepted that wild boars are fast in dense forest. Lucky for me, he arrived 2 minutes too late to see what actually happened. Back at the Wild Pear Slope, Zi had climbed down from his tree and was biting into a hawthorn fruit, his face scrunched up from the sourness. I told him wild hawthorn was actually good medicine, great for digestion and several other conditions. I promised to make him candied hawthorn on sticks. His eyes lit up when I said I'd make 10. I tasted the wild pears too, small but decent. I decided to cook them into pear syrup, which would be perfect for the dry coughs that came with cooler weather. Monin immediately wanted extra for his grandfather, who always coughed through autumn and winter. We split up among the trees and filled 2 30-pound bags with pears in half an hour. Then I noticed Fong sitting against a tree, her face pale. I'd gotten so caught up in excitement that I forgot about her weak health. She'd been walking and working for hours. I secretly added nutrition liquid to her water bottle and pressed a few pressure points on her back while handing it to her. Within moments, her color returned, and she felt strong again. She noticed the similarity to how she felt after Grandpa Faye's acupuncture treatments. I admitted I knew some massage techniques, but told her they could only ease symptoms. She still needed the full herbal treatment, including ginseng. Her eyes dimmed at the mention of ginseng. Her sister-in-law had heard about the search and was causing drama at home over the cost. Sometimes Fong Fong wondered if her family would be better off without her. I squeezed her hand and told her no amount of money was worth more than her life. Money could be earned back. A person couldn't. She laughed when I told her she'd earn plenty of money someday to support her parents in their old age. We headed back down the mountain loaded with mushrooms, pears, and hawthorn fruit. Monin carried the heaviest bags. By the time we reached the base, it was nearly evening. Lu Xiangqian and Hongbing were just heading up to search for us. Lu Xiangqian's son Hongbing turned bright red the moment he saw me and started stuttering again. His father shot him a disgusted look. Lu Xiangqian was worried when he heard we'd gone to Wild Pear Slope and scolded us about the danger. I promised not to go again, though I had no intention of keeping that promise. I gave him a bag of wild pears and some hawthorn fruit. He only let me pour about 2 pounds of hawthorn before closing the bag, insisting that was more than enough. On their walk home, Fong Fong quietly told her father that I'd revived her with a pressure point massage when she'd been too exhausted to stand. He was impressed, but she quickly added that I'd said massage only provided temporary relief. Real treatment still required medicine. Then Hongbing nervously asked his father who the man walking home with me was. Lu Xiangqian crushed his son's hopes without mercy. That's her boyfriend. A battalion commander. He came here specifically for her. Give up. Look at yourself. You can't even speak straight around a girl. You think she'd ever pick you over him? Not in a million years. Hongbing protested that a father shouldn't talk to his own son like that. Lu Xiangqian ignored him. Back at the courtyard, I put Monin and Z to work, spreading mushrooms to dry, soaking the pears and hawthorn in salt water for cleaning. I made a quick dinner of hand-cut noodles with soy sauce, vinegar, scallions, and a fried egg each. After dinner, Z immediately asked about the candied hawthorn sticks I'd promised. I told him we'd make them tomorrow at noon, no sugar before bed or his teeth would rot. We also needed more wild pears for the syrup and empty jars to store it in. Z suggested buying canned fruit so we could eat the fruit and use the jars. What he really wanted was canned oranges. I saw right through him and poked his nose. Just say what you want. He ordered orange, peach, and pear canned fruit. Monin laughed and volunteered to buy them tomorrow using Lu Xiangqian's bicycle. That reminded me of the bicycle ticket Monin had given me with his money. I asked if I could borrow it to buy a bicycle. Getting around on ox carts and walking everywhere was painfully slow, and a bicycle would change everything. Monin offered to buy the bicycle himself tomorrow instead of borrowing one. He didn't even remember the ticket was in there. The next morning, I was woken before my alarm by loud banging and wailing at the front gate. It was Sun Dahong, Tian Liang's mother, back again. Monin had been doing his morning workout in the yard, dripping with sweat in just a vest despite the chilly mountain air. He asked if I wanted him to open the gate. I said no. We'd leave through the back and let her cry herself out. Arguing with someone like her was a waste of breath. I noticed Monin kept glancing my way while toweling off, as if expecting me to admire his muscles. I was busy braiding my hair and didn't look once. He later stared at his own reflection in the wash basin, apparently questioning his appearance for the first time in his life. I found that quietly hilarious. I needed to deal with the leftover wild boar meat before it spoiled. Half went into salt for curing, half got chopped into meat sauce. Monin took over the chopping while I made breakfast and started cooking the sauce. By the time he and Z finished eating, the kitchen smelled incredible. Meanwhile, Sun Dahong had been waiting outside since 3 in the morning, cold, hungry, and exhausted. Her brother at the police station had told her that someone important at the provincial level had intervened in the case, ordering it handled strictly by law. She suspected Monin's connections. Without a forgiveness letter from me, Tian Liang was looking at years of hard labor. She waited until 7:30 before realizing I'd already left through the back. She asked villagers where I cut pig grass, and they deliberately sent her in the wrong direction. She wandered for 2 hours and never found me. Eventually, starving and dizzy, she gave up and left, cursing me the whole way. I didn't know or care. I was home making candied hawthorn sticks for Z. He devoured 2 immediately. I wrapped the remaining 8 in wax paper and stored them in a cool spot. I also set dough to rise for steamed buns to bring to my parents, along with the fresh meat sauce. And I planned to gather specific herbs in the mountain that afternoon. My mother had asked me for a special formula. As her health improved, she'd soon have to work alongside my father, and villagers would notice how similar we looked. She wanted something to disguise her appearance. I knew an old recipe. Certain herbs crushed together would make a face look sallow and worn. It couldn't be washed off with plain water, only with a special solution. Perfect for keeping our secret safe. Back in the mountain, Z was putting everything Monin had taught him to use. He'd learned how to read animal tracks, identify droppings, and spot signs of burrows. He suddenly called out that he'd found a rabbit hole. Sure enough, he was right. He'd identified every clue correctly from just one casual lesson. I set up a plan. Z and Monin smoked 2 of the exits, while I waited at the main opening with stones ready. Rabbits came pouring out. Everyone that appeared got a stone. One I deliberately only stunned, and when nobody was looking, I scanned it with my system for 100 star coins. Z got 1 too. His stone didn't kill it instantly, but it couldn't run. His weeks of practice were paying off. 7 fat rabbits total. An excellent haul. Monin stuffed them in a cloth sack to keep them hidden from villagers. On the way to the mushroom spot, I gathered the herbs I needed for my mother's face-disguising formula and quietly earned 30 more star coins. The mushrooms were even thicker than yesterday. The season was at its peak. We filled our baskets in 30 minutes. I deliberately slowed down, secretly transferring some of my mushrooms into my storage unit so I could smuggle extra home. Winter here lasted months, with heavy snow blocking everything. Z and I had no stockpile yet, unlike the villagers who'd been preparing for years. Every bit of dried food I could save now would matter. At Wild Pear Slope, the ground under the trees was already carpeted with fallen fruit. While picking pears, I spotted something in the distance, red fruit on a tree deeper in the forest. From the color and shape, I guessed wild apples. I told Monin I wanted to check it out. He insisted on coming along, and Z's excited eyes made it impossible to say no. This was all part of his childhood. Every adventure in these mountains would become an unforgettable memory for him. We packed up everything, full baskets, heavy bags of pears and hawthorn, 7 rabbits strung together on Monin's back. I led the way with my knife, cutting through thick brush, while Z followed happily with his small backpack.